My friend says caffeine's a drug. I said, oh, tell your friend, fuck you.
I don't want to be your buddy, Rick. Just want a little breakfast.
Hello. Timecop. 1966. Timecop. 1966. We're gonna talk some shit. Timecop.
Hello,
and welcome to Breakfast Punx podcast, a podcast about coffee, donuts, DIY punk, and anything else we want. Brought to you by Ramsay Roasters and Deadbeat Donuts from Hastings. I'm Siobhan.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Timebot 500.
Well, you can hear we've got a special guest here this week. Welcome, Timebot 500.
Hello.
Oh, hello. And Timebot's here because this episode is a special episode for our 10th one, and it's Timecops.
Yeah, one of the things I just thought about is when you made the description of what this podcast is about, is that this week it's not about any of those things.
Yeah, this
whatsoever.
week it is officially not about coffee, donuts, or DIY punk, and anything else we want is the main section.
Do not blame me.
What?
That didn't work at all, did it?
Well, Timebot's a bit drunk.
He asked us not to blame him for
we don't.
getting rid of all of the punk.
We
and all
don't
of the,
blame you, Timebot.
I mean, he did pick the year, though. So for those of you that listened to our last episode, you'll know that we picked a random year. Well, Timebot 500...
He did indeed.
Put it into his randomizer system, and he picked...
Definitely not on the spot.
And he picked as 1966, which, you know...
Well, we'll get on to what our thoughts about that
I
are
don't
in
know
a
how
minute.
happy we were about that, really. But yeah, so, sorry, explain to us, what is Timecops?
So Timecops is where we are going to pick a year. Well, we didn't pick a year. Timebot 500 picked us a year, and what we're going to do is do a amateur deep dive on
Very amateur.
on what happened that year. And we're using this as an excuse to kind of go back to years past and find out what the interesting things were. So that's
Sort
the point
of selfishly on our part in a way, because we thought it would be a good excuse to do a deep dive into various years. But
yeah.
I suppose we were hoping to find years that we were interested in.
Well, yeah, we'll get onto our reactions about that in a minute. So, Timebot 500, do you have a little ditty to play us?
Oh, yes. So Timebot 500 has made us an opening song.
I am very clever.
You are so clever!
Yeah, he's very clever.
Oh.
You'll like. I think you'll, as you get to know Timebot 500, you'll get to like him. He's a bit of a grump.
I can't wait. I can't wait for Timebot's little opinions as we go through. So, Timebot, let's hear your song.
Yes. Okay. So here we go.
1, 2, 3, hit it! We want to be free to do what we want to do. We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man.
We see this country trying to rule the world. This country is not God.
You've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all. And we want to get loaded. We want to have a good time.
No, I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing up with Jesus Christ as a person.
Well, I think the Beatles are a real talented group, but I think that they need to watch what they say.
We're going to have a good time. We're going to have a party.
So, 1966. Dave, what were your reactions to when Timebot picked us 1966?
Well, I was a bit gutted in a way. So we said last week that we almost didn't put the 60s in the randomizer at all. We were going to start in 1970. And to be honest, the only reason that the 60s were in there was because when I was creating the randomizer, I forgot what we'd said, and I put in 1960
I was surprised.
to 1969.
I was like, 66. Pretty sure we weren't going pre-70, but never mind.
But yeah, I don't necessarily. I don't know. I don't have anything particularly against the 60s, but then equally, I don't find many things. I don't know. I've never really discovered anything that I'm sort of that interested in. And then worse still, when I sort of did a basic Google immediately after we did it last week, all of the things that I am aware of in the 60s or that have any interest in, it seems like none of them did anything specifically in that year of 1966. So Herschel Gordon Lewis made a film every year in the 60s but didn't make one in that year. All of the writers, there's not like Kurt Vonnegut wrote loads and loads of books during that time, not one in 1966.
Oh, okay.
Almost every writer that I could think of that was writing in the 60s just happened to not have written a book in 1966.
So pretty much all of your preconceived ideas of what are good.
Even Charles Manson was in jail. Like, even sort of the sort of darker stories that I thought I might be able to. So I was completely put out by that, and I thought this is going to actually be a horrible thing to make myself do.
Yeah, what are we
doing?
To
be honest, how about you? What did you think?
I guess initial reactions were, oh, for God's sake, because I guess when we're specifically when we're picking films to watch, we actively avoid even most of the 70s, which I think is probably a bit naive or short-sighted on our part, but it's just the idea of what culture you find interesting. I think we've always considered is 80s and beyond, so don't really spend too much time going pre that. Which is silly because I know that the birth of rock and roll is long before all that, and there's really good all sorts. I'm fully aware that there's a heck of a lot happening in the 60s and the 70s, but I guess it just wasn't really high on my list of deep dives. But in saying that, loosely being aware of especially music that was coming out in the mid 60s, I was kind of excited to at least go and find out what was coming out that time and how it was interesting. And then in doing that, just little deep dives into what was going on in the world. It's quite nice to know. To find out these things. Yeah,
I mean, I think I was pleasantly surprised overall. I mean, I should probably say that one of the first things that I looked at when I was looking at what books came out in 1966, because I thought at least I'd probably be able to grab that, but like I say, I had no luck. It turned out that John Savage, who is a writer that I quite like and wrote a book about the Sex Pistols, wrote a book called 1966, the year the decade exploded. So I thought to myself, oh,
something
brilliant!
Must have happened.
This is going to be really easy. Then I'll just buy this book. So I bought it. It came through, and I thought to myself, "Oh, it's cheating a bit, but I'll be all right." And then it turned out to be 700 pages long. So I don't necessarily feel like I cheated because I had to read that in about a week. But as a result of that book, probably, I feel like I've got a better idea of the sort of bigger events and the bigger movements that were going on through 1966. Whereas I think one thing to say about this Timecop business is that we're definitely not experts at full stop, but if this was 2007 or something, then an episode like this would be loads of stuff about what we remember, the stuff that we were specifically into. But obviously even I wasn't. I was long before I was born in 1966, so I had nothing really to hold on to. And again, there's other years that are a bit like that. And actually, when you brought up rock and roll and stuff, probably if we had done a year in the 50s, I would have had way more stuff that I was actually genuinely interested in, because I do have some interest in 1950s rock and roll, and there's loads of cool B movies and stuff. But I feel like I suppose I just didn't have anything to hang on to really. But this book. So the book I will say when I'm kind of referencing it, if you like, but that's definitely helped me to kind of put a few things in place. And actually, one thing I will say, because doing a really quick look at the music as well, because I don't really, we'll talk about all of this later, but I don't really like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones that much.
And by don't really like the Beatles, do you like the Beatles at all?
Well, so I do actually think having done this, I've changed my view of them a little bit, not necessarily my opinion, but we'll get to that.
We'll discuss that later.
We're going to cover different topics, and music is much later on.
Yeah.
But one of the things I was surprised to find, here's something music-wise, I was just I'm not going to like anything here. Literally 2 of my favourite songs of all time were released in 1966.
I know exactly what they are.
And actually, there's way more. There's loads of fucking great music that came out in 1966. So that was good, and and I think it did. So just to say, we're going to cover 4 areas of each year. We'll do this every time we do one of these Timecop episodes. We'll do news, then we're going to do cultural events, then we're going to do music, then we're going to do film. Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, we often specifically don't watch films from the 60s, to be honest. And like you say, the 70s up to a point. And it was a good excuse. Whilst I'm not going to say I was blown away by them, there was some good. I was glad that we watched the films that we watched. But
we'll get to that later. But I guess it's being naive about what was culturally relevant in the 60s and finding out that tons of the stuff we like actually takes a lot of relevance and influence from stuff in the 60s, and actually is stuff from the 60s. Like I say, the stuff that we ended up watching is not like unusual. It wasn't like never heard of this stuff before. It was like, oh shit, actually this is really common. This is not really common, but this is really culturally interesting, and we've always known it was, so why have we never actually bothered watching this stuff? Yeah,
I think there's a weird thing about the 60s when you're specifically into the type of stuff that we're into, where it's kind of a black hole for influence. It is how I kind of look at it, in as much as probably my earliest music that I absolutely love and feel any real kinship with is punk. And punk was influenced by the 50s more than that's how I always viewed it. That's a really ignorant and like simplistic way of looking at it. And I think it's the same with films. It's like a lot of films that I'm into that are like trashy B movies, they're influenced by 50s trashy B movies. And so I think I've always just kind of ignored the entire decade of the 60s in a lot of ways. Although obviously there's a lot of stuff that I'm aware of, and just by default, like there's stuff that you just can't get away from. But I think we're probably this is maybe a weird thing to say, but I feel like the way that a lot of people would have heard a lot of the music and stuff that we're talking about would be through their parents. And whilst I think my mum was into a lot of 60s stuff, my dad was very much into like 50s music, and obviously that continued through the 60s, so there's loads of those bands that were still going, and that was the stuff that he was listening to. Whereas I feel like your parents were probably into the 70s.
Yeah, very much. My dad definitely was like 70s rock. I would say there is so my parents used to buy these music compilations off of like shopping TV. So I do vividly remember that started in like the first compilation is somewhere in the 60s.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So and there's one for every year.
Yeah.
So actually it would have been really interesting to have found that one for this. So I do remember that we did listen to quite a lot of music from the 60s, but again as a kid I probably didn't put all the two together. Like I say, when we get onto the music and find out just what songs came out in that year, I mean it's crazy how much good stuff came out and how much stuff I actually do already, like you say, you already love.
Yeah, and actually through reading the book as well, because the music has a lot of an effect on this, like the political movements that would go on to kind of be the things that I think we're still feeling reverberations of now.
Yeah.
I think I always see that as being like 1969. But
or 67. Literally 67.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, we'll definitely get into this, but that's kind of what the book that I read is all about. It's like 1966 was the year everything changed.
But that's because when everything got made that came out in 67, I guess, as well.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think also it was like the seeds were sown for like all of the stuff that then kind of happened afterwards.
Yeah.
So it actually turned out to be a really interesting year to cover. Actually.
Yeah.
What will happen now is in 10 episodes' time, we'll do another Timecop and we'll get like 1967.
We'll be like, fuck's sake.
Also, but that'll be Timebot's fault.
Before we get fully into this, my mum will either never forgive me or never forgive me for bringing this up, but she was born in 1966. So, yay the year of the mum.
We're going to do a section on this show where we go through everyone that was born in 1966.
Yeah, well, I didn't want her to be in that bit.
You'll see why in a bit.
Because it's not very nice. So, yay 1966, mama. Hello, Kim. There you go. Timebot says, "Hey, Kim."
Sorry, Timebot. I think is. I think Timebot was actually built in 1966.
I think Timebot is drunk. And it does not sound well.
He's definitely not going as quickly as I would like him to.
Well,
but he's going to keep his mouth shut for most of this.
Well, he's not, because he's about to introduce what the first section is.
That's a good point. So, without further ado, we're just going to G up his system.
Come on, Timebot, you can do it. Where we go. The news is first. Now, I should have mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to do a small quiz at the beginning of each section. And Dave doesn't really know that this is happening.
Nor am I possibly going to be able to answer any of the questions. I imagine.
I figured I would just do like a mini, like 3 or 4, 5, 6 questions at the beginning of each bit.
Is this like Trivial Pursuit or something?
It's not quite like Trivial Pursuit. It's more like
Is it
pub
lower
quiz.
brow? All right, I might have a chance. You never
Yeah,
know.
and some of it's like actual facts, and some of it's I've scraped together some facts and made questions, so it's not going to be very good.
Oh, right, okay.
But number one, in 1966, there was a survey, and what percentage of New Yorkers were found to pronounce bird like Boyd?
Sorry, could you do the impression of a New Yorker saying bird again, please? No, I know exactly what you're trying to do. Don't show it to me, I'm not going to help.
I can't do it. I really thought I'd never like actually said it out loud because
Please do it
I've
again.
been sat in the same lounge.
Please do it again, because otherwise I won't be able to answer the question.
How many New Yorkers were found to say bird like Boyd?
Boyd.
Boyd.
What percentage?
Yeah.
1966. I'm guessing that New York accents, I don't know why I say this, but I think those kind of strong New York accents have probably died off a little bit over time. Probably, but in 1966 it would have been very multicultural already, but it wouldn't have. I'm going to say 40%.
100%.
What? Fuck off.
Yep, not one New Yorker could say bird properly, and I can't even say
Well,
it like
that's
they said
definitely.
it.
But can I just say
This
that's
is the level of
that's
questions that I
unquestionably
found.
not true.
It was on the internet somewhere.
Okay.
Okay, well here's a better, more factual question. Apologies for that.
Well, because it's not completely wrong.
No,
More
I
factual.
found. I don't know
No, I
what survey
believe that it was on the internet, but go on.
Well, okay, apologies. Some of these maybe not even facts. What was the average house price in the UK?
Oh, it was really low. I feel like I saw this on something. I think we might have looked at the same website.
Probably.
But my memory's so shit that it's not going to help anyway. It's something ridiculously low, like $8,000 or something.
We could have bought 2 boilers. It was 3,840.
Fucking hell.
Isn't that crazy?
Of a house?
Yeah, that's what an average house cost in the UK.
Jesus Christ.
There you go. So, on to more
If
useful...
Timebot 500 could take me back in time, we could just buy loads of houses.
I cannot.
Oh,
well,
fuck's sake.
Fuck you, Timebot.
That's me out of
I feel like
money,
you're not
innit?
going to be very helpful at all. But anyway. Well, next question. Very good.
All right.
Okay, so obviously some sporting event happened in 1966. We're not going to go into it. UK was very happy about it. Boring. But 7 days after it was stolen, a dog finds the FIFA World Cup trophy wrapped in newspaper in a South London garden. What was the name of the dog?
Oh, fuck's sake. I was about to say this is. I think I actually know the fact that it got stolen and that a dog found it, and I was looking forward to being able to actually sound. What was the name of the dog? I don't fucking know. Ralph.
Pickles!
Oh.
It's a good quiz, isn't it?
That's a brilliant quiz.
Alright, boring one. Ronald Reagan,
Yeah.
actor.
I've read quite a lot about Ronald Reagan.
Oh, well then you'll know this because
I
it's a
hope
very
so.
boring question.
Go on.
Which state did he become the governor
Oh,
of?
California.
There you
Oh,
go.
yeah, that's-
The beginning of many actors becoming some kind of politician in California.
Well, much more complex than that. I mean, it's the beginning of like the new right wing. But anyway,
Oh,
we'll get
I'm
onto
sure
that.
we'll get onto that really
or
nice
try
bit.
anyway.
All right. What was on the front cover of the controversial issue of Time magazine, and why did it make Time magazine history?
I'm getting a bit confused now because.
Because you're dementing.
Yeah. No, because we watched something the other day. I've put so many facts about the 1966s in my head.
That's why I've got this quiz to help
So
you
there was a
allay them.
time. No, but there was a time. I've got a feeling this has nothing to do with 1966. There was a Time magazine cover that got changed at the last minute because somebody died or something. But then they got taken off the front cover of Time.
That's in culture. That comes up later.
Okay, fine. All right, I won't ruin that then. No spoilers.
No,
So
but
sorry.
it's not quite that.
I don't know. Go on.
So, on the front cover it said, "Is God dead?"
Oh,
And
it
it
was because of John Lennon saying that the Beatles are...
No.
No, all right.
No.
Well, we'll get to that later. Like I say, I've put too many facts in my head.
And why did it make Time magazine history?
I bet it got the most complaints Time had ever
It
had.
did, but that's not why. It was the first Time front cover to not have a picture. It just said, "Is God dead?"
Oh, I can picture it, I think.
in red writing on a black background.
Yeah.
It got something in the region of 3,140 something complaints.
That doesn't sound like anywhere near as many as I thought it would.
Yeah, maybe.
That
Well,
seems crazy. I would have thought it would be like 50,000 or something.
yeah. Well, it got a lot of complaints, mostly about the title, and no one really read what was in it.
Oh, well,
and it was basically just saying, like, in this secular society, is there a point to God? Everything's really horrible. People are dying. Blah blah blah. But anyway. Back to this really good quiz.
Yeah, go ahead. I thought this was only like a couple of questions.
Well, the news bit has like 7 questions, but then all the other bits have like 3.
By the way, I don't know if we've said this. We're not going to play any music or anything.
Oh, shit, sorry.
On this episode. No. But so we've sort of replaced songs with this quiz. So I am really sorry.
I am sorry.
Oh, all of you can fuck off. This is a good quiz. All right. What word did 13-year-old Robert A. Wake win the 39th National Spelling Bee by correctly spelling?
Oh, fucking hell.
I've never heard of this word either.
Oh, well then, no, definitely. I'm not sure I can
don't
say
know
this.
why.
I'm going to say this wrong. That word, I feel like it's in a film of someone getting it. Onomatopoeia.
No.
Did I even say that?
Onomatopoeia. I
Yeah,
actually know how
I
to
didn't
spell
say
that.
it right. Yeah.
No, it's quite simple. Ratoon.
Oh, I don't. Well, that's
Can you
French,
spell
isn't
it?
it? Ratoon. Well, it must be Ratoun.
No.
Oh.
Oh, you'd have got it wrong. 13-year-old Robert Wake spits on you.
Well, how's it spelled?
Ratoon.
Oh.
What's it mean?
Well, that's just.
I should look this
I have
up.
absolutely no idea.
Should look that up. All right.
I'd asked Timebot 500, but I think he's demanding more than I am.
No, he's had enough. Cool, right, sorry, one last question. This quiz has gone on a bit long.
Just pretend it's a song.
Bobby Gibb becomes the first woman to do what?
Be a Bee Gee. That was a funny joke. Bobby Gibb, first woman, 1966. Did she go into space? It's too early for
Weirdly,
space, isn't it?
maybe a tiniest, tenuous link to the Bee Gees. Really
Oh,
not.
really?
Really
so
not.
she's an Australian?
No.
Did she go to Australia?
No, ignore all of that.
Did she
I'll explain.
have-
I'll
was-
explain if
Did
there
she
was a
have
link.
loads and loads of ugly brothers?
Maybe, but I don't know. No,
Go
there
on.
may not be a link because I may have got my places wrong.
Oh, okay, go on, let's try. This is
Becomes
going
the
really well.
first woman to run the Boston Marathon.
Fucking hell.
Where's
no
Massachusetts?
woman.
Is it Boston?
Oh, Massachusetts.
Is that Boston, Massachusetts?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
see, there was a Bee Gees link. So yeah, no woman had run
That
it before.
song isn't from 1966, though, is it?
No, it's
You're only allowed links from 1966.
And recently, because I think it must have been the anniversary of her running that marathon not that long ago, there's videos of her being pelted with stuff by men.
Fuck a duck.
Like,
really?
absolutely. She was the only woman to have ever done it at that point, and people were outraged that she dared do it, and she got things thrown at her the entire way around.
There's so many crazy things
disgusting.
like that.
Yeah.
Because it's weird because I suppose it probably depends on where you are in the country. So much American politics, there was like some really forward-thinking things going on that you would almost think like the nation must be a step beyond that. But of course not. Yeah, we'll get. But I mean, you know, in 1966, the South was still fucking segregated and stuff. I mean, it's just crazy. You know, it's crazy how. Yeah, there was people that were really forward-thinking, but there was obviously.
And then there's people hurling
A
stuff at a
little
woman
bit,
running
you
a
could
marathon.
say, like today. But anyhow.
Ooh. Has it changed? Have we learned?
So we're going to use a few different things to kind of go through the news stories. We've both picked various random things out, but we've also we've found a couple of different websites which have like lists of the biggest events. So we thought we'd sort of talk about some of those. So I'm just going to pull out a few from there, I think, to begin with.
Go for it.
Mississippi was the last state to repeal prohibition on alcoholic beverages after the national prohibition ended in 1933. They ended their state prohibition in 1966. So the state of Mississippi, you couldn't drink alcohol until 1966.
That's crazy.
It's fucking mental, isn't it? There was a conspiracy theory that Paul McCartney died in a car crash and was secretly replaced by a lookalike named Billy Shears. That was pretty good.
I feel like a load of my facts are pretty horrendous, in as much as there's quite a lot of death stuff. So I've got like there's two major shootings that happen in America. There's not really been like these huge shootings before. And then you've got this guy called Richard Speck, I think, who murders 8 nurses. And then Charles Whitman, 16 people gunned down at University of Texas in Austin.
This might
and
be
that hadn't
wrong.
really kind of happened.
I was going to say, I
before.
think it was the first time there was ever like a mass shooting like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's the first time, but it was like the first sort of one that was perceived in the way that, you know,
yeah,
mass
like
shootings
big
are kind of seen.
yeah. I think it was one of the biggest ones, which is weird. And then the other thing, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady get sentenced to life for the Moors murders. You know, I just find all the nice facts.
So I think the main news story in America that was kind of going on, or at least the main event that was going on, was the Vietnam War at this point. And like we sort of said earlier, the Vietnam War protests and things like that, I always see as being something that's kind of somewhat later than 1966, more like very late 60s and possibly even early 70s as well. But certainly in the book that I read, there was kind of a suggestion that it was the year that people started to question whether it was worth being in Vietnam or not. And so there was very much kind of two sides to America, and I think possibly even the world to some extent, or at least the Western world, in people that were like extremely behind the war, and there was lots of things that were like, for example, not to jump ahead too much, but like in the music charts there was a couple of really big hits that were like, one was sung by a soldier about how great Uncle Sam is, and there was a bunch of sort of stuff like that. But then equally there was kind of this beginning of a discussion of the Vietnam War basically being wrong. And I think that there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I think the main one was that 1966 was the year that the most amount of troops were deployed into Vietnam, and so there was a draft going on, and so a lot of young people were really feeling the sort of threat of actually being drafted. And it was random, the draft. So at any point, anybody between certain ages could just get called up and told that they had to go to Vietnam. And there's a suggestion in the book that kind of influenced an awful lot of stuff. And actually, it made everybody think, well, I'm probably going to be sent to war at any point, so I might as well just do what the fuck I want. And so I think that as a result of that, there was quite a lot of kind of civil movements that sort of that got picked up, and as well as that, going along at the same time, there was still a lot of nuclear threats going on. And so in the run up to 1966, there was a lot of anti-nuclear protests and things, which were generally very peaceful. And whilst 1966 is seen as the year where that kind of movement started to die down a little bit, not because the threat of nuclear bombs kind of went away or anything, but just because there was so many more, obviously civil rights was growing and feminism was growing, and the Vietnam War became like the main thing. But there is this suggestion that people generally felt a little bit like there was so many threats, they felt so at threat that it just put them in a certain mind state of just like I don't care. Like if you see, what's the point in getting a normal job if you're 20 years old, if chances are you're going to get sent to war and you're going to die? You might as well just enjoy yourself. The narrative of the book very much suggests that that's kind of what led to what happened, more or less. Like I say, the thing that I sort of see as happening in 1968, 1969, which is the all the hippies and all the sort of peace movement and that sort of stuff. And there was a lot of, so like you say, there was a lot of kind of riots that happened, which again, potentially, they were often about different things. So there was a riot of gay people and drag queens in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. Was
that in 66?
Yeah, well, I think there was more than one, but I think that was the first of its kind.
Yeah,
and I think,
I remember the Tenderloin. We must have watched something where the Tenderloin was brought up quite regularly. I didn't realise that was 66.
It's an amazing place, the Tenderloin. I've been a couple of times. It's sort of the Skid Row of San Francisco, and it's a really cool place. Nice. I stayed there for a couple of weeks. It's it's pretty scary. It's kind of gnarly, but it's fun. I don't know. The bars are good.
Well, exciting time.
But there was things like the Watts riot. There was a riot in Chicago, which wasn't the big one, that was obviously much later. But these were often, a lot of these were more about kind of like, it was one of those things where there was a lot of protests going on, a lot of which were peaceful, but often the police were very brutal in their response to those things, and as a result, it does. There's a lot of this stuff that just could be now. Yeah. It's like that thing where there's a peaceful protest, the police come in too hard, the peaceful protest becomes a non-peaceful protest,
and then they're justified
they go in even harder,
there.
and then and then before you know it, the army's being called in, and it's one of those things, and
it's awful because the only narrative is they were justified for having to be there because look at the violence that ended up happening.
And it just sounds like now, really, it's that classic thing that like middle America are just seeing these kind of dirty hippies without jobs, or these black people that they're scared of, or or gay people, or all the people that they're scared of are kind of doing these civil rights actions, and of course it's being presented by the media in a certain way, so they just become more scared of them. And one of the things, just going back to Ronald Reagan, is that a lot of the reason that he was the person in California he would go on to become the American president. He was in California. He was the person that said, "I'm going to put a stop to all of these student riots. I'm going to come down hard on all of these black people that are
rioting." And
so, as a result of that, like I say, that's kind of considered to be the start of like the new right, which really is still going on.
I mean, that's not even more.
Yeah, it's like the first step that led to Trump, really. Yeah. Mrs. Miller was a middle-aged housewife with no formal music training, whose first album, Mrs. Miller's Greatest Hits, consisted of badly sung covers of popular pop songs. Have you ever heard Miss?
No.
No. So I don't know Mrs. Miller, but there was another one called Mrs. Mills. Oh. And so when I was a kid, Mrs. Mills albums, I wonder if Mrs. Mills was like the English equivalent. I'm not totally sure. No. But in charity shops everywhere in the 90s, you could buy Mrs. Mills albums, and it was just this woman wailing like hits from the 60s and the 70s, really badly. And she became a bit of a legend amongst me and my friends in the sort of early 90s.
Just to say, as we've done a bad job of mentioning this thus far, there's not going to be any music, and there's not going to be any like DIY punk this week's episode. We're not going to be able to play any music, but make sure, like always, but really make sure on this one that you go to our YouTube channel, because we're going to make a playlist of all the references that we can find from 1966. There's going to be a lot of music, a lot of film, and I'm wondering, can we put any of this Mrs. Miller on there?
If I can find it. I presume there'll be a Mrs. Miller YouTube page.
I want to hear her wailing out some song that she's singing incorrectly.
But yeah, definitely. I think particularly before we get to the music bit, if you're like us and didn't really know anything about the 60s, go and check out our YouTube playlist, because obviously we can't play any of these songs. We can't really... Yeah. I kind of sampled a few for that opening gambit, but only because I farted around with them
fiddled with them so much,
so that Spotify won't ban us.
I don't really have too much to say about this, but Chairman Mao starts the Cultural Revolution in China.
Oh, yeah.
Which featured in an episode that we looked at, an Adam Curtis documentary quite some time ago.
Yeah.
And an awful lot of the new Adam Curtis documentaries kind of start with that, the Chinese Revolution. It's just interesting that came up, because I feel like we've discussed that a bit in the past. I'm not going to discuss it tons because the Chinese Revolution is huge. But there's something else that happened, which is it's about American law that is kind of awful. And basically there's this thing called the Miranda Rights, or Miranda Warning. And a conviction of a rapist was overturned and the rapist was set free. And this was a confessed rapist. Mm-hmm. So basically, in 1963, a lady is abducted, raped, and the chap that got arrested is called Ernesto Miranda, which is why it's called the Miranda Rights. And basically he gets arrested and isn't informed of his right to remain silent, so he just confesses straight away, because he says, yeah, I did it, you got me, gets put in jail. And then his lawyers go, oi, you weren't reminded of your right to, you didn't have to say that you did it, and we could have tried to defend you. And so this gets taken to court and case law gets made out of it. And it turns out that the police should have told him he didn't have to say he did it, even though he did. And so that was wrong. And therefore the case was thrown out and this man goes free.
It's crazy.
It's fucking horrendous.
So
and then
that's
from
why
then,
they read rights now.
So now when they arrest you, they say you have the right to remain silent. They have to say that, because when they didn't say that, this rapist got off.
Oh, isn't the law a crock of shit?
Isn't it awful? Isn't it so awful? Oh, but in saying that, sorry, he did have a second trial, and eventually he was still convicted.
Oh,
so that's
good.
fine.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
I didn't read that the first time. Oh, it's all good.
There's a happy ending.
There was a small happy ending.
1966 was considered the year that sort of civil rights started changing. It's a little bit similar to what I was just talking about a minute ago, but I didn't really go into this. Martin Luther King was probably the loudest voice in the civil rights movement at the beginning of 1966, and probably continued on. But obviously he was part of a pacifist group. And this guy Stockley Carmichael, who ran something called the SNCC, who was also they were basically a pacifist group. But somewhere in early 1966, the two groups sort of got together to protest together. And I think Stockley Carmichael just felt like the pacifism wasn't really having much of an effect. And this was in the run-up to the Watts riots and the Chicago riots that I just mentioned. And I think one of the biggest turning points is that the first black student that was allowed to go to a white college was shot by somebody.
Oh my God.
So following on from this, Stockley Carmichael was the first person to use the phrase Black Power. And so he started to make a lot of speeches. And I don't know if he was based there, but I think certainly he spent a lot of time in San Francisco. The two guys that started the Black Panthers in Oakland obviously heard him speak, and I think might have been part of the SNCC initially. And then they kind of broke off. So whilst 1966 isn't really like the year of the Black Panthers as such, like it's not when they're sort of most famous for being active, it was certainly when it initially started. And again, it's kind of another example of this thing where political points are kind of becoming a bit more extreme, and people are speaking out a little bit.
Yeah, they were officially formed in October that year.
Yeah. One of the other things that happened, which again is sort of mentioned in the book more than anything else, is that more people in the public eye, more black people in the public eye, started to kind of become more outspoken. And whilst I have to say everything that I read about in the book, it doesn't sound particularly outspoken to me, you know, like, but I suppose within the confines of the time, where pop bands were expected to not really have any political, no political statements whatsoever. Yeah. People like James Brown, when this student got shot, he put on a concert to make money for his hospital bills. And that was seen as a really extreme political statement in 1966. Whereas now, obviously, if someone did that, it wouldn't be, no one would raise an eyebrow, of course. But obviously, it was such a different time in this context that.
And I think speak out in general, a bit like you were saying earlier, that people were just kind of having their say a bit more and kind of, I don't know, feeling like they could speak out and say things weren't on. For example, I read earlier Muhammad Ali was one of the conscientious objectors to the war and a person of colour, so it was just like, you know, people were feeling that they should be speaking out more. Yeah,
totally. And I think as well, it's in a society where you're expected to not say a word. Speaking out even the tiniest little bit is actually a massive cultural event.
But then isn't it depressing that then, like you said, Ronald Reagan is the one that gets in by saying all these people that are speaking out that aren't white Christians, well, we're going to make sure they shut up. And thus begins the American dream.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the other interesting things, which I feel like is so similar to now, is that, and this is, I suppose, I don't know if this isn't really news, it probably fits into more the culture of the times, but it's definitely appropriate to all of this stuff, is that there was a real, like, generation gap. So the parents of the sort of the older people, particularly in America, but actually over, in this country very much as well, were the people that fought in the Second World War, for the most part. So those people had a very specific outlook on country and patriotism and all of that sort of stuff. But the children, and this is a really interesting thing that this is something from the book, but there was a bunch of people that said this, is that there was this general consideration that the children of the time were getting so much information because there wasn't just the radio. Yeah. There was pirate radio stations. There was TV. The TV had more than one channel. There was like comic books, and there was newspapers, and there was magazines. There was all, and so it was like they had so much more information to learn from. And so as a result of that, of course, that's why you get the late 60s, I guess, where where people have actually, they've read books about things and they've got a much better education than their parents and things like that. And I feel like it's really similar to the here and now. It's like you've got a real generation gap now as well. It's really similar. But yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why it's really quite interesting. Almost in everything we're going to talk about, there's two real, really different ends to what was popular at the time. So, like I say, in music, there was on the one hand there was quite rebellious, quite politically motivated music on the one hand, and then on the other hand there was people singing about being good parents and being good Americans and this sort of thing. And I think that's probably true. It's probably true across the whole of media. There was, and again, I suppose it's really similar to the now. It's the comparing sort of the Daily Mail to the website that you get your news from, whichever one it happens to be.
Or the ability to, I don't know, look around and research things rather than just believe what the Sun told you that day, or what the news, Sky News.
But I mean, again, it seems so ridiculous to say that now. It's like they had a couple of magazines and some TV channels, and that was seen as like, whoa, that's so much information. And now that seems so ridiculously quaint.
Yeah, but isn't it awful that we've got like so much more information and yet we're in the same, if not worse,
but it's about
sort of like political dynamic extreme.
But it's about who's using the information, isn't it? That's the thing. So
and who's able to put that information out.
Well, yeah, and also who's able to like take it in a kind of meaningful way. So like. At this time, it was exactly the same. The older people had exactly the same amount of magazines and newspapers and television stations. But the difference is that they were brought up in a world where they only listened to the radio, and so they weren't made to take in that much information. It's the same now. No, it's exactly the same now. It's like my parents aren't made to go on the internet and take in loads of really confusing information. And then come out of it with because they're used to, they've been presented with media in a different way, where it's just like what you read in this newspaper is correct. So it's like, right, I've read this on the internet, so shit, this is correct. But then I've read this on the internet, shit, this is correct. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
So whereas I think like younger people are able to kind of. Two men climbed up a hill in Brazil, placed lead masks over their faces, and apparently killed themselves for unexplained reasons. What? The only clue left behind was a note that read, 16:30, be at agreed place. 18:30, swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals. Wait for mask. Signal.
Wow, that sounds UFO-y. I like that.
Good, isn't it?
I like that.
That was never explained. Alan Assels tiddlywinked 10,000 tiddlywinks in just 3 hours, 51 minutes and 41 seconds at the University of Wales.
What's tiddlywinks?
I don't know how you tiddlywink. 10,000 things. Tiddlywinks is like they're like little round bits of plastic, and you flick another little bit of round bit of plastic. But I don't know what the point of it is.
I don't know.
I thought it would just be left alone. I didn't know I was going to have to explain it.
Sorry, I don't know. So that's enough for the news for 1966 for now. So Timebot, can you?
How are you doing, Timebot? Sorry, we haven't really checked in on you for a little while.
I am okay.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad.
Good.
It's nice to hear.
Good.
I'm glad. You haven't got any news stories to sort of share with with your public?
No.
Oh, good. Well, it's great to have you here, Timebot. You can introduce the next section for us.
Okay, but I think he's going to need to be greased a little bit. His gears need to be greased a little bit, so just bear with us.
Cultural event.
Oh, thank you, Timebot. Well, let's start with what I'm hoping will now be my famous quiz.
The Timecop's quiz.
The Timecop's quiz of greatness. Okay, Andy Warhol was active in 1966, and we'll talk about him a bit more.
Yeah.
But what was the name of the feminist that shot him 2 years later?
Oh, bollocks. So I've read about this and watched a documentary about this. I don't know. It's not going to come.
Valerie Solanas.
Yeah.
And how many times was he pronounced dead?
Twice.
Correct.
Yeah.
Hey. Also, side question. What did he say when his brother told him his mum had died?
Not to tell anyone. And to be the cheapest possible funeral that you could possibly get. But he did say because she would have wanted it that way.
Oh, well, he said that right at the end.
I didn't really feel, because I mean that's exactly what I want. Like that would be my instructions.
But I love it. Like your brother rings up and goes, "Oh, Mum's dead." Okay, well, tell no one and make sure it's really cheap. Like
I mean,
really
I think it's
cheap.
weirder that he recorded himself on that conversation. Really,
It is
that's
strange.
probably a bit weird.
Truman Capote. He wrote a book that year. We'll get onto that.
Yeah.
What did he carry with him from the early years until the very day he died?
Ooh. The guy that he was that In Cold Blood was about gave him something. No?
He received this item way earlier than that.
Oh, okay. What did he carry with him? Golf ball.
A security blanket made by his nanny.
Oh.
His nanny Sook.
Oh.
Yeah, that apparently he had on him the day he died.
Oh.
Good old Truman Capote.
Yeah.
The highest scoring football game in history happened this year. It was Redskins versus the Giants.
Oh, American football.
American football, yeah, sorry.
God.
What was the score?
Right, well, a normal score in American football can be in the sort of 40s because they get quite a lot of points. I'm going to say 76 to 68.
God, I thought you were going to get it then. 72 to 41.
Oh, well,
there you
it's
go.
close. Closer than it should have been.
There you go. One more question. In the UK, why did the miniskirt cost less than other similar clothing items?
Because it used less fabric?
No. Shortening to less than 24 inches meant they were classified as children's clothing and not subject to purchase tax. There you go.
That's really dark.
I know, it's awful, isn't it? The most sexually provocative clothing that women could wear children's clothes. But yeah, that's enough for my little quizzy quiz.
Okay, so we're going to cover a bunch of cultural events, but to begin with, we're going to play what hopefully will be a regular game of Shove Them Back In or Let Them Live.
Oh God, Dave named this.
It's
Timebot
500 named this.
He's a gross bastard, isn't he?
In which we look at the people that were born in the year 1966.
Mm-hmm.
And we make a decision as to whether they should have been shoved back in or whether we're going to allow them to live.
Oh, it's so awful.
So I think Timebot 500 is going to pull out random names from all the people that were born. So Timebot 500, who is our first celebrity? Adam Sandler. Well, I absolutely hate Adam Sandler.
I knew you were going to say you hate him.
I think even the stuff that most people think is good, I think is pretty fucking terrible, to be honest.
Oh.
I'm trying to think if he's done what's good. What's he done that's good?
Wedding Singer.
Wedding Singer's all right, but
And
I don't
he's
like him
done that
in
one
it
with the
very much.
golf. What's the golf one
No,
called?
that one's that's the one that everyone that I know all thinks
The
is great.
Water Boy. I can't watch
Water
it because
Boy's
he pretends to be
fucking terrible.
he pretends to be mentally unwell.
Has it got the Fonz in it?
I have no idea.
I think it's got the Fonz in it.
I don't know. I like my fair share of really shit films, so I can handle Adam Sandler. Even that Big Daddy, which is really soppy and shit.
I've seen that.
Oh, it's quite bad.
We
I do
watched
like
a movie
it.
with him in that was actually pretty good though. One of the Safdie brothers films. New one.
Yes, he
I can't
plays
think
that
what it's called.
overweight jewelry jewelry shop owner.
That was
really
that
good.
was all right.
He was really good.
Yeah, he
in
was
that.
good in that. He should have just done serious acting if that's what he could do. Because he.
Turns out he could, but he never showed it. So you
So I'm definitely shoving him back in.
Oh no, I can handle him.
You're going to let
Wedding
him live.
Singer. If it wasn't for the wedding, no, actually, I've only watched the Wedding Singer once. I don't really remember it, but Billy Idol's in it on a plane, so.
Yeah, but I don't. Just because I'm shoving Adam Sandler back in doesn't mean the Wedding Singer doesn't get made with someone else.
Oh, okay. We've got Jim Carrey. We don't need Adam Sandler. He's in.
God, we don't need Jim Carrey.
Oh,
either.
piss off!
Definitely shove him back in. All right, next.
Is that Gordon Ramsay?
I think that might be Gordon Ramsay. Sorry, Timebot 500. I didn't really like your E button. I needed to wiggle.
He's
it a bit
Ramsay,
more.
isn't he?
He's Ramsay.
Yeah. I feel like there's obvious hatred for this man, but there's this awful thing that he did to someone on that terrible programme where I can't remember what the programme would be called, but it's where he has like two teams of chefs pitting against each other. Maybe it's called Hell's Kitchen.
Okay.
And I've never seen the programme, but it gets shared as a meme quite a lot, and it is awful. So I feel bad for laughing at it, but the meme does make me laugh quite a lot. Where he's got two slices of bread on someone's face, and he's screaming at her, "What are you?" And she's going, "I'm a shit sandwich."
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And it's so awful, and obviously it shouldn't have happened, but oh my God, it does make me laugh. Which is awful. No, he's a horrible human being. There's no need to be so rude and so shouty, and I like food, but he's a He's a bell end, isn't he?
I don't know whether it's fair to like blame him for it, but I feel like he's the like original purveyor of just being a horrible prick.
Yeah, no, I think
like,
he is.
This is my charm is that I'm just going to be fucking horrible to everyone, and everyone's going to
like the
celebrate.
shit sandwich, which I know is awful.
Everyone's going to celebrate me for it.
And I
just think that's such a horrible cultural episode in our. I think we'll all look back on it horribly embarrassed with ourselves.
Yeah.
That it's a little bit like Top Gear. It's like that thing where you just think these fucking people were like someone's hero.
Yeah.
Now look how wrong our world must be that Gordon Ramsay is like someone would buy a VHS of Gordon Ramsay's script. No, not a DVD. A Blu-ray.
A Blu-ray.
You know what I mean? Like for Christmas or something. I feel like there's or like Gordon Ramsay's book about how all the people he hates or something.
Well, because he made a programme where he used to go into people's restaurants and make them better. And the whole programme, like at the end, there'd be like maybe a pleasant story about how it was improved. But there'd be 45 minutes of him screaming at them, telling them how shit they are.
But and that's
and
the
how
reason
awful.
anyone would have
Yeah,
watched,
that's what I mean.
right?
Like the main programme is just like him berating someone. And again, I can live without the shit sandwich meme. I know that's really awful to have laughed at it, but it is awful. And I can see him for being a horrible human being, and even I've given that a giggle, which is bad. So he definitely can be without the world.
It's just like a psychopath for psychopathic TV.
Exactly.
For people to enjoy.
Isn't it awful?
It baffles my mind.
And
completely.
like, there's in the world of like, if we're gonna like look at chefs that are famous that are on TV, how dare Gordon Ramsay live and Gary Rhodes die when he's so?
Gary Rhodes dead.
He died like 2 years ago.
He's from Orpington.
Or like last year, he had a brain out of nowhere. He had a brain problem and
See, I've
died.
not been keeping up with the local news.
Yeah, and he's a lovely man. He was a nice TV chef, and you got Gordon Ramsay who's putting bread on people's heads.
So you actually want him to die?
Gordon Ramsay?
You would.
If one chef had to have
kill
died,
Gordon Ramsay to bring back Gary Rhodes.
100%.
No, with your own hands, you yourself would. If I said you could batter Gordon Ramsay to death and Gary Rhodes would come back to life,
and there'd be no comeuppance on me.
No comeuppance.
100%.
Wow.
100%. Gary Rhodes is coming back, and Gordon
I
Ramsay.
think you need to make a psychopathic TV show where you just batter people to death,
and then stare at them and wait for the other person to come back. Oh.
Well, I'm definitely shoving him back in. I've got a horrible feeling I'm shoving everybody back in.
Oh, come on, pick another person.
Well, it's not.
Timebot
has to.
I am trying.
He's trying.
Oh, I was like, who's I'm trying?
All right. So, Timebot, who is our next celebrity?
Mike Tyson.
Oh no, Mike Tyson. Well, no. So Mike Tyson, I definitely wouldn't shove back in. But I mean, for as much as I like him now and see him as kind of a cuddly person,
he was a bastard.
He was a horrible prick.
Is he the one that bit someone's ear off?
Yeah, I might shove him back in.
No, because he was a good boxer.
Yeah.
He was horrible.
I don't know if that's like.
I mean, I don't like boxing.
He was good at beating people up. I don't know.
Then he got a face tattoo.
Well, the face tattoo's alright.
And now he's just. I mean, we could have saved him from his life had he never been born.
So I've seen the documentary about him, and he did have a really sad life. He had like a really horrible childhood, and like boxing sort of pulled him off the streets. And I'm sure some of it's a bit overly dramatised because it's a real kind of,
Yeah.
it's made that way. But I'm pretty sure he's done some really horrible, dodgy shit in his life.
Like biting someone's ear off.
Well, yeah, but no, outside of the ring, I think he's. I'm not going to bother looking it up.
I don't think you get a tribal face tattoo if you're.
Maybe you do.
Great.
I mean,
well, apologies to anyone listening who's got a tribal face tattoo.
We know people with tribal face tattoos.
No, but like his one.
Yeah, I think. And without being funny, probably the time that you got it is indicative of because it's a bit more socially acceptable to get a face tattoo now. I suppose he definitely got it when it was.
He did it for reasons,
anyway,
didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, bless him.
Well,
he's in AEW now, so
yeah, he does pop up. Well, that's the version of Mike
wrestle.
Tyson that I'm quite fond of, and I sort of think, it's nice, little Mike Tyson.
Where he takes his t-shirt off and shouts at Chris Jericho.
He's really bad at taking his top off.
Oh, he's not very good.
He's been in AEW twice, I think, or maybe 3 times, and both times he's sort of come out and then he's had to tear his shirt off because he's got angry. But he's not very good at acting angry, so it sort of looks a little bit like a child trying to pretend. Even though he's obviously good in real life at being angry, but he's never been able to fully tear his shirt off. It always ends up still like
stuck around his head.
Yeah, or like round his waist as a little belt,
Yeah.
hanging off at the back. And don't think that's deliberate. I
think-
do think he might be demented or something. He seems confused.
I mean, he's had a few punches to the head.
Unquestionably. Yeah.
So, but I feel like I'm liking him in a patronising
All right.
way.
I think I'm going to change. I was initially thought unquestionably I'm going to let him live. I think I'm going to kill everyone.
Oh my god!
I'm sorry. I'm going to shove him back in.
Oh.
What are you doing?
Let him live. Oh, but then people have been hurt by him, and I don't think boxing's back in
Back in.
to save him from himself.
All right. So who's next, Timebot?
Rick Astley.
He still can't do the E's. Yeah, I think that's Rick Astley.
Rick Astley, 1,000% is staying out. In fact, if I could swap the others for more Rick Astley,
So if you
do
could
it.
beat the other three to death, and then Rick Astley
And
comes
Gary
back to
Rhodes,
life,
no,
even
and
though
then
he's not
Gary
dead.
Rhodes comes back, and I get 2 more Rick Astleys.
All right, this
There's
is a
Rick
game I
Astley
wasn't
supergroup.
expecting for us to be playing, but
I'd
yeah,
like there to
okay.
be 3 Rick Astleys and a Gary Rhodes.
Like Westlife, except those 4, or those
Yeah, Rick
3
Astley
and 1.
all day. He's never
Yeah.
done anything wrong apart from being posh.
Yeah, no,
But he doesn't shout at people with bread.
He's never done any harm to anyone. He's definitely going to be allowed to live.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Right, a couple more.
Yeah, a couple more.
Oh.
Death.
Shove him back in. Next.
Matt Freeman.
Oh, Matt Freeman, the bass player from Rancid, was born in 1966. He's much older than I thought he was.
Is that actually him? There's not another person called Matt Freeman.
No, it's
Who means
Matt
him?
Freeman from Rancid. He must have been. Hang on. Operation Ivy were like 87.
Yeah.
So I suppose, he's only 20.
Yeah, so
One.
old. 21.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I never really
Yeah.
thought that. I pictured
Well, I
him being at least a bit younger than that.
Yeah, shit, actually. There's probably tons of people in 1966 that are decent.
Well, not that we can
from-
find. We've had
Well,
Cameron,
not on
we've
the,
had
like...
Tyson.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, from the punk scene, there's probably...
Well, so
of
this
that
is,
age.
we've brought it back round, haven't we? We've done a punk podcast that's got no punk content in it, but now Matt Freeman turns out was born in 1966.
And we have to let him live.
So what do you think of Rancid?
What do I think of Rancid?
Yeah, we talked about
Ooh.
Operation Ivy before, and obviously we all know how great
Rancid
they
are alright.
Yeah.
They're alright. They
Yeah.
did a few alright albums. I would say that the bass is a bit fiddly. So
Yeah,
if any of them,
actually.
although he's not the one that's going back in. If any of them are going back in, it ain't him.
Oh, I know which one's going
Yeah,
back in.
that Millwall idiot.
Who would you?
He'd
if
like
you
to be
beat-
thought of as the
if you
Millwall
beat him to
idiot.
death, who would come back to life?
Oh, can I have another Rick Astley?
Jesus Christ!
No, there's tons of people I could probably
Rick Astley,
have.
Rancid would have been fucking shit if Rick Astley
Oh, Rick
was,
Astley on
was
the bass.
brought in as the
On the
second guitar.
guitarist.
They were a 3-piece for the first album, and then on the second album, Astley's in.
With his big blazer.
Never gonna pick it up.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
So yeah, no, I mean Rancid. I loved Rancid when I was young. They were like one of,
Yeah.
I suppose it goes without saying just because of my age. Really, they were like one of the first. Like Let's Go is one of the first punk albums I ever got. Probably.
Yeah.
But I've never done nothing they've ever done I've disliked. I kind of
That's
like
it.
most of them as people. Like you say, Fredrickson's got a couple of issues, but but for the most part, like I think of all of those sort of the bigger bands and stuff, I feel like they're the ones that they've maintained some sort of quality to their music,
And
and
I
like
think-
they're all right people and stuff.
And even when they were at their most, like, sell-out big, if you compare their sell-out big to, like, Offspring and Green Day, who were equally
Yeah.
sell-out big at the time, and look at them now, like, Rancid were authentic the entire time, and
Yeah.
more authentic and more bearable, whereas you've got, Green Day and Offspring, not saying that they're all similar, but they're the
No,
other
but
two
they-
bands
yeah,
that
they
got
totally
as big
are,
as
yeah.
them at the same time.
Yeah.
Rancid are by far and away the more reasonable version of all that, and likeable, and their songs are better, generally. But anyway.
I think Green Day probably made better songs, but overall, if you look at
But only
their
in those
career,
couple of albums.
I think Offspring unquestionably are the worst of them.
Yeah, I'm sorry for bringing them up, but I only bring them up. 'cause
No.
they're a big
I mean,
album.
they made a couple of fucking amazing songs and one really good album, but if you look at their career as a whole,
horrendous.
It's, yeah, I'd kill them off and bring back 4 Rick Astleys. I'm quite enjoying this. Let's do one more. So Timebot, sorry you weren't expecting this last one, so it might take you a little while to compute. Dimebag Darrell, the guitarist
I was like, what?
from Pantera.
Who's dead already.
Who's dead already, so I suppose it's a bit dark if we shove him back in, but I don't think I will, actually, anyway.
He's not the racist, he's not Phil Anselmo.
No, he was dead before he was allowed to come out as a racist.
Yeah,
so I don't know what his
shot on
politics
stage?
were. Yeah. It's a really dark story. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, that's the trouble. Phil Anselmo's kind of really tarnished Pantera's legacy. Whereas, in fair, I don't think it's really tarnished Dimebag Darrell's legacy, because I think people still see him as like... well, also, they see him as a legend, and probably partly because he died so young and stuff. He's kind of... I don't think he's been tarnished by the fact that his frontman has gone around Zeke-heiling.
Yeah.
But then a lot of people don't seem to have even picked up on that, or I don't seem to really care about it, because he still has a career. So. But yeah, I think Dimebag Darrell... I think Vulgar Display of Power by Pantera is a fucking banging album. And I think that they've... I think for their time, a bit overproduced. It's not the greatest music in the entire world, but it definitely sums up a very specific like time in metal.
Agreed.
So I'm gonna let Dimebag Darrell live, but unfortunately Mother Nature is...
He's already taken care of that. Aww. Dimebag.
So there you go. That was a game of shove them back in or let them live, which, I'd encourage anybody to play. It turned out to be quite enjoyable for me.
So, culturally, in the year 1966, you were kind of already saying that there was tons of things not done this year. Like, all the writers you liked from the 60s didn't seem to write a book or, not really sure what else was going on that year. But it turns out some good things came of that year. Truman Capote wrote that book, In Cold Blood. Yeah. Which was his first... Was it the first true crime...
It's considered like the classic first true crime in the modern sense. I'm sure there had been like other exposés and stuff written, but it's the first time that like an artistically written true crime book was made. Really, it's I haven't read it. So I didn't write it. I haven't read it for a really long time. I read it about 10 years ago. It's great. It kind of suffers from being the first of its kind a little bit, I think, because I haven't read loads and loads of true crime, but I think I've probably been lucky in as much as I've just handpicked all the ones that people have told me are good. And so I think people have done it a lot better since. But I suppose at the time it seemed like this incredible piece of work because it was totally different to anything
come out of nowhere
that was around. But yeah, I couldn't find that many books at all that were actually written, really.
Ooh, I mean, and this kind of speaks to culture in general, but Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson comes out the next year. Yeah. So is it that in 1966 he'd have been with the Hells Angels?
Yeah,
or it would have been prior to that,
so the book is written about 1966. Or I think 1965 and 1966. That's a fucking brilliant book. That's probably my favourite thing that Hunter S. Thompson ever did. It's not that similar to like the gonzo journalism style that he became known for, really. Again, it was like a really... I think it was the first... It was the first book he'd ever written, and he says he hadn't really found his voice yet at that point. But I think I actually prefer it in a lot of ways. Hunter S. Thompson's one of my favourite writers, I think. And I mean, he's more of a journalist, obviously, but to me, I just think as a writer, he's incredible. And yeah, the Hells Angels book is so interesting. If you don't know, he basically spends a whole year living with them, taking part in it's in the run up to a really big like bike rally, and we'll talk about this a bit later because we watch a biker film in the film section. But bikers generally were very much in the cultures kind of throughout the 60s. It wasn't specific to 1966. It just happens that was the year that he spent with them. But the bikers were kind of like the bad guys of the time, I suppose. They were the punks of the 60s. So again, we talked about this, about like when films want to show like that you've gone to the wrong part of town. In the 80s they showed punks, in the noughties they showed kind of like rap dudes, and in the 60s
boys in hoodies.
Yeah, in the 60s they showed bikers. That was kind of their like boogeyman
bad boys
of culture. So yeah, and so at the time no one knew anything about them. They were this completely, well, they weren't that new, but they were in sort of mainstream media. They were this thing that no one knew anything about, and they were up to all of these crimes, and they were always fighting, and they were always doing drugs and all this stuff. And actually they were doing a lot of those things, but yeah, they were kind of like the boogeyman of the time. So he went in there as a journalist and just like got to know him more or less. And the book doesn't really paint them in that good of a picture. They hated him afterwards, and they made loads of threats towards him and stuff. And there's a brilliant interview, which I'll put on the YouTube playlist, which won't be from 1966, where basically a Hell's Angel and him are kind of arguing in a TV studio, and it's fucking great.
I have one more thing. Fashion-wise, obviously the miniskirt becomes famous. And I have some... I've read a bit of history about the miniskirt, so I'll go on to that in a minute. But the other fashion thing that happened, and it's kind of relevant to this week's news as well. Had it been a normal episode... Well, had it been a normal episode, I'd have probably mentioned this as well, so it's all a bit weird. In 1966... Paul Van Doren and his brother James Van Doren create the company Vans and start making the rubber skate shoes that pretty much everyone wears now. And the reason I would have brought it up is because Paul Van Doren died last week at the age of 90. Bless him. So
I bet they didn't know that it was going to become what it's become.
No, I don't even know if they knew it was. I can't imagine they'd have thought it was a skate shoe at the time. I don't know. It was definitely in California that they started their company, so I imagine very quickly. Skaters
Well, you
would have
say. I
used
mean, I
it.
feel like Vans. Well, yeah, but Vans would have got. I suppose the time of skaters. When was the Dog Boy stuff? That was like mid-70s.
Yeah, so
And I
this
guess
is
that's
like
the first time that there was any popularity. So I imagine Vans started as a very small company that would have relatively slowly grown, and 70s it would have got a bit bigger. Then the 80s, when skateboarding was massive, it would have got really big, and then obviously it's kind of become this massive conglomerate now.
Yeah, in the first 10, their 10 stores didn't. Their first 10 stores didn't turn a profit, and they were told to shut down. And he did the opposite and opened more stores. He figured the more shoes he made, the more the cost to make them would go down, and in turn keep the stores afloat. And it worked. And he had 70 stores by the end of the 70s.
I guess skateboarding must have. Yeah, it was probably
It would have
the
been
time
picking
where
up.
it started to. It would have
And he
just
was
started.
he was in the right place. They were in Anaheim, so they'd have been right there in the midst of it.
Well, there was some. There was some LSD trials that happened in 1966. That was probably not a huge amount. So LSD was like this is a very long story to tell throughout the 60s, and not very much specifically happened in 1966. So the Merry Pranksters weren't really doing much, and Timothy Leary was kind of just holed up in his house getting high, really. But he did testify at some of the LSD trials, and then following on from these trials, eventually, because LSD was actually legal, and it was criminalised in 1968. But the sort of first step to that started in 1966. But I think LSD, again, not to sort of jump around too much, but LSD, it's considered that it influenced an awful lot of art during this period, and certainly going forward. And I think it was 1966 was kind of when it was at its zenith, when most people were kind of getting into it and trying it, and it was having a real effect on music, and it was having a real effect on art generally. When the game of Twister was introduced in 1966, it was denounced by critics as sex in a box.
Sex in a box?
Yeah.
Why?
A PR firm got Johnny Carson to play the party game with one of his guests, actress Zsa Zsa Gabor, and that popularised the game. I didn't know Zsa Zsa Gabor popularised the game of Twister. I suppose sex in a box because you're just climbing over each other. I mean, in fairness,
fair enough.
Twister's such a kind of like normalised thing to us now. But I suppose if Twister didn't exist and you were just going to make it up, you probably would have been thinking about, like, copping a fig. Just based on the noise that you just made, there was the book talks an awful lot about the rise of camp, and the way that camp was like the first step in introducing more gay rights. And it's quite an interesting story because, again, the examples that the book gives in 1966 now sound almost insultingly, quite insulting and quite homophobic. But actually, it's generally considered now, looking back, that there was a lot of, or quite a few, like TV characters that popped up that were like quite camp male characters, and there was the fashions of the time. The male fashions of the time became extremely camp, and there was a lot of like all the mod fashions. And if you look at all the sort of beat groups, particularly in like Carnaby Street and like Swing in London and stuff, the clothes all went from, particularly considering in the 1950s it was like suits and jeans and t-shirt, and that was kind of it, became much more camp. And it's generally considered that that was actually the first step in a lot of gay people not fully coming out, because homosexuality was still illegal, but kind of there was almost like an acceptance of nudge, nudge, wink, wink
Yeah.
kind of type stuff, which again now just seems so archaic. But I guess at the time it was a really big deal. And there's an amazing producer, a guy called Joe Meek, who's quite famous as being a producer. Who's kind of like England's answer to sort of Phil Spector or something. And he was gay. He also had an awful lot of mental health problems later on. And 1966 was probably the last year that he was actually kind of active and still making stuff. But he made a song, which again, apart from the fact that it was made by a gay man, it was made by a band who were heterosexual males and didn't actually realise that this is what they were doing. But there was a B-side on one of their singles, and I can't remember the name of the band, it's not anybody very famous, where it was like just the sound of a bar in the background and a little bit of music, and it was like two men having a conversation. In terms of today, it seems really homophobic because it's two men sort of going, oh, look at her, oh, you know, and sort of, but he basically was just telling them what to say, and they had absolutely no idea that what he was telling them was a bunch of like gay code words, and he was telling them to act in a way that was... But you know, this is how ignorant people were. They didn't even know that what they were doing would be considered camp or whatever, because it just didn't exist, this idea of being camp. And so this record gets released on, you know, just on the B-side of like a popular hit single. And of course, again, it was like this sort of under the radar thing where this gay man had kind of snuck in all of these references. And because everyone was so secretive, it was like really eye-opening for all of these people that bought this single, you know, some of whom were probably gay and couldn't tell anybody. And
but also really subversive and cool for those who are in on the joke.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But like I say, if you listen to it back now, which I did, I had to stop it because it just seems like a horrible... it just seems like a horrible pastiche of like two laddie blokes sort of doing a really terrible impression of what they think gay people talk like. But again, it's in the light of 1966, they weren't looking at it through the same eyes as me, so...
Yeah. So in 1966, the miniskirt becomes really popular, and that's said to be created by a lady called Mary Quant, who had a shop in London called Bazaar. It was on King's Road. She was said to have created the skirt, but looking at a little bit of history here, miniskirts seem to have existed for years before then. Some people said like 5000 BC. Ooh. There's like figurines where people are wearing these teeny tiny little skirts. They were very leggy back then, weren't they? And there's also I read somewhere about like ancient Chinese times. Where are we looking? Oh, not that ancient. Literally, I don't know what counts 1952. As ancient. No. But like in the like 1650s onwards, early 18th century. There's this group of women called the Duan... Oh, no, I'm not going to say it right.
Say it in Norfolk.
No. From the Qing dynasty? I don't know. Yeah. Is that right?
I think that's right.
A Qing.
Yeah, I think that's right. Be terrible if we're both just wrong.
Oh, gosh, it's awful, isn't it? But basically, there's a picture and there's these women in these teeny... They look like they were in 60s miniskirts walking up a mountain. But essentially they're doing that because it was probably the most sensible way. If they're going to wear a skirt, it might as well be short in order to get up the hill. Why they didn't just wear trousers, but again, they're women and it was unheard of for any women in any culture to be wearing trousers. So they just wore these tiny skirts that didn't really cover their bums so they could walk up the mountain. And then in the 50s, with all the sci-fi films that were getting made, it was quite common for like those silver like sci-fi skirts and boots and stuff. So it was kind of always happening, but I guess Mary Quant was the first person to bring it to like mainstream culture, to a lot of
furore.
Well, men were, had something to say about it. Women who wore them used to be called the ya-ya girls because of the common catcall they'd get yeah shouted after them by the cool 60s men.
I mean, we haven't really mentioned, I feel like it's sort of come up here and there, but I guess this was very much the time of like swing in London, in inverted commas, and definitely fashion-wise, Carnaby Street was like massive at the time, the King's Road was massive at the time.
And I guess it's kind of the... Oh, okay, so this is interesting. So with the 60s came the big breakthroughs and revolutionary movements that had changed the course of history, and one of those was the development of birth control pill. And so it was said that people could explore and indulge their sexuality without the fear of falling pregnant, and the miniskirt conveyed this newfound freedom. And I'm just reading a bit from an article here, and the person who's written it said, I can just envisage it the middle-class patriarchy angrily shaking their fists at the confident young women embracing their bodies in style in an attempt to quash any influence they could have on society. It just would have been such a big deal for a woman to have worn a short skirt. Which, again, weirdly happened in the, 2000s when Christina Aguilera started wearing an even shorter skirt.
Yeah.
And that caused controversy all over again.
Well, the book talks a lot about the sort of movement, the sort of feminist movement as it was taking off. And I think, again, generally speaking, 1966 isn't the year that kind of really took off. So it's not, but it's certainly where a lot of the seeds were sown. There was an organisation called NOW, N-O-W, that was set up that were kind of like, that they'd seen what civil rights leaders were doing for black people in America, and they wanted to kind of do the same for women, kind of thing. And it's another thing that whilst again no major steps were taken in the year 1966, it was like that was the sort of beginning, the genesis of some of this stuff as well. On a slightly shitter note, the first episode of Star Trek was shown in 1966. I don't have any idea what you're going to say when I ask you this. What's your opinion of Star Trek?
I actually do have an opinion. I wish that I'd watched it, but I fear that if I tried to watch it now, I just wouldn't. I don't know that I'd get into it. And again, this is my preconceived notion of what the 60s were like. Having now watched the films, maybe I would, but I love...
Have you watched the old films or the, I mean, I don't really know anything.
No, when I say
Star
watch the
Trek.
films, I mean watch the films we watched from the 60s.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
But I've not watched any single thing to do with Star Trek other than I've possibly watched some Star Trek Next Generation at Tanya's house.
Hi, Tanya.
Yeah, hi, Tanya.
We're doing a podcast, you know. This isn't just
I
a chat.
know. So Tanya and her mum used to watch Star Trek a lot religiously. Okay. And I don't know anything about Star Trek, but Tanya's going to be fucking livid because she knows everything about Star Trek.
So we've got this in common. My best mate Jed, who I've known since I was 3, was really into Star Trek when we were kids as well. And I never really watched it. I did watch some Next Generation, and I've definitely watched whichever Star Trek movie has got the Punx in it. I think it's The Search for Spock, I think. And I actually remember, when I watched that, I thought, fuck, this is great. I thought it was brilliant at the time. But for some reason, it didn't then set me off to want to watch more. It seems like such a big thing to...
That's the thing, because it's so old and it's so huge.
Yeah.
Just, it being old makes me think, will I like it stylistically? But also, there's just been... It never really stopped for so long. So there's so much of it to watch. And it just feels huge. But I would like to one day. But I haven't, which is bad.
I don't know whether we ever will.
Batman and Robin started that year as well.
Yeah,
on telly.
there's a movie which we did, which I almost suggested that we watch, but we didn't.
Is it the one where it's like goes biff?
Yeah, exactly.
Bam!
That, yeah.
Oh,
it's
I like that.
But it's kind of influenced by pop art, weirdly. But I mean, I don't know how obvious that would be to watch it now, because I think it's obviously made for kids. I used to watch those old Batmans when I was a kid, and I used to fucking love them when I was really little. But yeah, in hindsight, it was really influenced by some really out there shit, like...
Well, pop art was going on at the time, which is probably the other thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we haven't talked about Andy Warhol at all, actually. But 1966, again, it wasn't really the year that he did anything in particular, but the one thing that he did do was it was the year he gave up painting.
I was about to say he stops painting, doesn't he?
And moves on to kind of other things. And whilst this sort of moves into music to some extent, I'm not really sure that we won't really be talking about it in music because nothing actually came out of it. But it was the year that he started working with the Velvet Underground. And also the year that he started making films, which initially were a lot of things
Well, he just watched his mate sleep for 5 hours.
Well, there was one that was 23 hours of just the Empire State Building without moving.
Yeah.
There was a lot of
all
stuff
the
like
lights
that.
come on.
Yeah.
That's it.
Some of the movies that were made not really by him but in his name later on were really good, but these ones, they're not really that watchable. But yeah, they did a live show which started in San Francisco.
Wasn't it?
Which was the Velvet Underground plus Mary Woronov dancing. Mary Woronov is one of Andy Warhol's original sort of girls or whatever, but she ended up being in Chopping Mall and Night of the Comet. She's in loads of 80s crappy horror movies, so she's fucking brilliant. And then they showed loads of these films on all the walls, and it was like a really psychedelic
Oh, and she's
experience.
like dancing like a weirdo, and just in front of them with that dude.
I can't remember his name.
now.
He's not in any 80s
No.
horror movies. But yeah, it was called the plastic.
It's called The Exploding Plastic Inevitable.
That's the one.
Which is just wonderful.
Such a great name.
So good.
But there's a YouTube video of it, but it's not terribly good. But I'll put it on the list.
Well, so we watched a documentary about Andy Warhol, which is on YouTube,
Yeah,
so we can put it on the
as well, yeah.
playlist. And John Cale's in it, and I love his I love everything about. I'm sure he's difficult, but I really, really like his just general attitude.
Yeah.
And he talks about these events, and he's just like, we just detuned the guitars. It's
Yeah.
the best they ever sounded.
And
It just sounded really good.
we wore dark glasses because we couldn't stand the sight of the audience.
Yeah, but he's just like, we just detuned our guitars because it was easier to distort and just made loads of racket. And to be honest, I loved how it sounded. And he's just.
But
I really like him. He's
we won't
nonchalant.
talk about him in music, so maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But
Yeah.
like Velvet Underground were a band who I always kind of didn't really write off, and I always knew that people said they influenced punk and stuff. And obviously, I knew the sort of famous songs. But
Yeah.
you bought their album a few years ago.
Yeah, we just moved to
and
Hastings, and I fancied it.
I think it's fucking brilliant.
Good.
It's so good.
And do you know what? Like, and again, I don't mean to quote the documentary, but I genuinely believe this. I could fuck off nearly all the other songwriters around that time. I think Lou Reed is amazing.
Yeah. Two very quick things, and then maybe we'll end the cultural events. 1966 was the first years that Doritos were... so it was an important year for Siobhan.
Well, that's a very cultural
And
relevant.
almost on exactly the same note. 1966 was the year that Anton LaVey started bringing people around to his house to do satanic masses.
Yes.
And whilst it's not the year of the Church of Satan, that's 1969. It was like when it started, basically, and when he first
San
realised.
Francisco?
Yeah. When he first kind of realised that he could
Make a church.
and
do a
have a
thing.
nice time.
Yeah. Come round, there's a lady on my altar, let's go. Oh, I love it. Doritos and Satan.
Yeah, Satan.
Do you know what? Is it a real vegan problem that I keep calling Satan?
I wonder if I don't think there was such a thing as Satan in 1966.
Yeah, definitely, 1,000%.
Yeah?
Buddhist monks been making it for years.
Oh well, there you go.
But
why didn't you bring it up?
But the whole of but I've just realised the whole of the Satanic Panic episode last week I called Satan. I don't even think I
You
can.
just did it then.
How'd you say it? Satan.
Yeah. Well, you can say it in a number of
Oh,
different
I don't
ways.
know. I think I just say it the same way.
Just
All
say
right.
the Dark Lord or Lucifer.
The Dark Lord, Lucifer.
All right, I think that's probably it for culture events, isn't it? We've gone on a
Exactly.
bit. We're going to move
Christ.
on now to music. Timebot 500. If you could just give us a little introduction there. Music.
Yeah, that
thank you
sounds like
very
music.
much.
Cool. So, quick quiz for the music round. What song was number one in the UK today in 1966?
Today, as
Yeah.
in what day is it? Today.
Do you know any songs that were number one in the UK?
Well, so because I've been reading, I mean, no, I'm not going to get it right, but I've been reading an awful lot of songs that were...
I don't know
so
this song.
it was, do you know what?
Stop it.
It was a really... because Tom Jones was number one for ages, but that was later in the year, and there was
He's
another
number one
song.
over Christmas.
Yeah, but there's
Impressive.
because there was a bunch of... This is one of the discussions that happened in the book, is that there was all these new sounding songs that came out in 1966, and a lot of them were like really massive, and like the Beatles were changing and all this sort of stuff. But there was just a couple of really massive songs. Was it Spanish Fly?
No, but I wonder if you're... I don't...
Or,
Yeah, no, this band fits into the old. For sure. They had another famous song that didn't come out this year that I do know. I don't know any other songs by this
Was it
band.
the Seekers or something like that?
No.
It was someone really shit. Go on, who was it?
Manfred Mann.
Oh, okay. No, that's not as old. That's not the sort of old.
Oh,
band
okay,
I'm talking
good.
about, but
Pre-Flamingo. No, because I just quickly Googled them. I was like, oh, this is the Mighty Quinn.
still. Yeah, no, I like the Mighty Quinn. My first punk band covered the Mighty Quinn.
I knew
Really
that.
quick.
As it should be. Okay. Grace Slick performs live for the first time with which rock group?
The Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah, and and those songs. Jeez.
Hey, that one song is. We'll get to
Oh,
it. but,
which?
Yeah.
There's two.
Yeah, but there's one that's a lot better.
Ooh. Okay, Bob Dylan became the object of the most famous heckle in rock and roll history. What was it that a disgruntled fan shouted at him? And it was in the UK.
So was this when he went electric? But no, it was. Was it Dylan were a bastard in the second half? That's the famous. That's the famous line. Because it's somewhere up north, and And because they didn't like, because he played all of his folk stuff, and then he went off stage and he came back on and played electric. And afterwards, there's a really brilliant interview. I'll try and find it on YouTube.
Oh, that's better than this.
And they're just like these real like northern lads, and they've come there to listen to folk, and they hate the fact that he plugged in and he just went, "Dylan, we're a bastard in the second half," and then walked off, and it was fucking brilliant.
Okay. Well, what might they have shouted at him?
It was something like heathen or something.
Kind of Judas.
How
dare he.
Actually, that's really famous.
How
Sorry,
dare he. And then there was a group that had 5 albums in the top 20 Billboard charts simultaneously, 4 of which were in the top 10 simultaneously. Who was it?
I think it's... So, the Beach Boys released 4 albums in 1966, but I don't think it's them. The Beatles didn't, but they were still really massive, and it could have... I think it was the Rolling Stones.
It was...
Oh, is it not someone... Is this the trick question?
No, you've already mentioned them. This is Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass.
Oh, fuck's sake.
And they did
That's Spanish Fly, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
didn't know who they were. 5 albums in 1 year is disgraceful.
But so this was just quickly. This is another thing that the book talks about a lot. Is that it was a time when no one really bought albums. So the singles chart were the big things. But equally, 1966 was the first time that like bands started to spend a really long time over albums. So it's when Pet Sounds came out. It's when the Beatles started working on
The
Sgt.
Doors,
Pepper's.
don't they have their first album in 1966? Or they record it, I think. So, but yeah, that's the end of my quiz.
So, we're going to go through the top 20 UK singles, and some of them we know, some of them we don't. So we'll jump over a few. So at number 20 in 1966 was Sloop John B by the Beach Boys.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Right, well, so I listened to it this morning, weirdly enough. It's on Pet Sounds.
Okay.
And the only thing I'm going to say about the Beach Boys, although I do really like them, and sort of had, again, before kind of researching this or listening to much stuff from 1966, I figured that the Beach Boys were going to be one of the shining lights. I don't really think Pet Sounds is a very good album. It's got some brilliant songs on it, unquestionably, but overall as an album, I know this isn't a very popular opinion, and I think I may be one of the very few people that holds it, but I don't, and I think out of all the singles, I think that Sloop John B is quite annoying.
I don't know off the top of my head, and I feel bad because that's my album. I never listened to it.
All right, well then let's jump on to one that absolutely isn't a bad song and is one of the greatest songs probably ever. The Small Faces, All or Nothing.
Literally, this is fucking amazing song. Like, this was I know that they say like the singles were still a thing, but I mean that is a stupendous song.
I mean, I didn't realise, and I read this somewhere, or I don't know, some point in this 1966 journey I found out, that the Small Faces were immeasurably young. He was 19 when he wrote... I don't know whether it was when it came out or when he wrote All or Nothing.
Gosh.
That's mad. And he died when he was in his mid-20s, I think. So, like, their entire output. But, yeah, Small Faces aren't like, the perfect band, but they have some of the great... They're the ones who I knew their songs immediately. Just, like, 60 songs that still stand up and are still fucking banging.
All or Nothing.
And Ichiku Park.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Fucking amazing. Next two, I'm pretty sure we're not going to know anything about. Chris Farlow with Out of Time. Any idea?
Not off the top of my head.
No? Mindbenders, Groovy Kind of Love.
Oh,
That's not the Phil Collins. Did Phil Collins do Groovy Kind of Love?
He did do a song with Groovy Kind of Love.
It's got to be, isn't it?
I know, without listening to it right now, which we can't do. Let's skip over. We've got plenty
I spent
of songs
2 weeks looking into this stuff, and now I'm thrown by Groovy Kind of Love. Number 16, The Beatles, Paperback Writer.
What a shit song.
Oh, I mean, so yeah, go on, you go ahead.
Well, maybe it's not shit. I don't know, but I don't care for the Beatles that much. Although I do like some of their songs, like tons of their songs are absolutely fine. But I don't think I like Paperback Writer as a song.
I think Paperback Writer is probably one of my more favourite Beatles songs. I mean, I'm not a great big fan of them by any means. I hate John Lennon as a person, but quite like some of his songs. And I hate Paul McCartney's songs and him as a person.
Yeah.
George Harrison, don't feel one way or the other about.
I like George Harrison because he wrote "Wake Up, I Might Sit on You."
No,
Which is really good.
No, he didn't, ladies and gentlemen. Explain "Wake Up, I Might Sit on You."
Wake up, I might sit on you. I swear, when I first heard it, I was like, "Why is
not
this
when you first heard it? About 3 years ago, we were in a supermarket and you were singing it. And I said, "What are you singing?"
No, I knew it wasn't. But best song any Beatle ever wrote.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
But number 15, the Spencer Davis Group, Keep On Running.
I like that song.
I like it.
I don't think it's that good.
Yeah, it's not the 15th best song. Of
No, it's not.
1966. The Beach Boys, God Only Knows. It's a good one.
No, I really like God Only Knows. I think it's a
Yeah.
brilliant song.
No, it's a really good song.
It makes you think the Beach Boys are probably really good.
Well, there's going to be another one in a couple of
That's
goes
true.
that does as well. But yeah, yeah, no, it's a brilliant song. The Beatles, Day Tripper, and We Can Work It Out on one 7-inch single. Pretty good, pretty solid.
Yeah, I do like those two songs actually.
Yeah, Day Tripper's a good one.
Yeah, well, I like We Can Work Out. Next one, Good Vibrations.
Yeah, Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. So that's a fucking banger.
That's a tune. That's a tune.
I
Can't
mean,
go wrong.
there's no doubt about that. Again, I was just disappointed by Pet Sounds as an overall album. I definitely like all of the really big, famous Beach Boys songs. I really like, but I just not sure with that one. And then we get into, well, we've mentioned this lot already. This bunch of goons. Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass with Spanish Flea.
Spanish Flea.
Not very good. This is again another example of the kind of, the book presents it as another example of kind of straightforward Britain buying a couple of songs and making them really big, and there's a bunch of them coming up. Manfred Mann, Pretty Flamingo at number 10.
Number 1 in 1966. Today.
There you go.
Yeah, that made no sense, but yeah, I've already done that.
Trogs with a Girl Like You.
Did Trogs do Wild Thing?
Yeah, very much.
Okay, so I don't know With a Girl Like You. But
So I've listened to it, and it didn't really strike me as anything that great.
Cool.
To be perfectly honest. But Wild Thing's a good song.
Yeah, Wild Thing's awesome, but this, yeah.
But better still, number 8, The Kinks, Sunny Afternoon.
Oh, we did watch a Ray Davies documentary yesterday, and it was so nice.
Yeah.
And I didn't even really appreciate how good Sunny Afternoon was until then.
Such a good song.
It is really. I mean, obviously it's really good, but
yeah,
brilliant song.
it's insane.
Isn't it mad that the best Kinks songs have, well, they're all good, but the big ones have already been before 1966?
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't know. Actually, I think they kept up a pretty high.
But I mean No, but I mean the big Kinks songs, as in Holy Shit, You Really Got Me, and All Day and All Night.
Yeah,
they've already done that by 1966. That's crazy to me. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they also this year they did Dedicated Follower of Fashion, which is cool. But they also did Dead End Street, which is I think is absolutely fucking brilliant. It's such a good song, and it's another one that I don't think they're really remembered for that much. And it was kind of a hit at this time, but it's got a brilliant video where they're walking along with a casket. It got banned because they're just kind of laughing undertakers walking around the East End.
They were like Dickensian looking.
Yeah, and they're like shoving it in. They're just like shoving this casket all around to try and get it in the house.
I love that.
And then I think eventually at the end they drop it and a man jumps out and runs off. But yeah, it's a wicked video. I'll put that on the YouTube playlist as well. But that's a great song. But yeah, Sunny Afternoon's beautiful. I mean, I just think Ray Davies is such an amazing songwriter.
Oh my gosh.
No one needs me to tell him that.
Yeah.
And then Tom Jones with The Green Green Grass of Home.
Christmas #1 that year.
Load of horse shit. Mm-hmm. The Walker Brothers, The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore. That's a real fucking banger, that.
Oh my god, do you know what? As I read it, I went, I don't know that. And then all of a sudden I just heard it in my head.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that song's amazing.
Yeah,
what
the Walker Brothers.
Song.
I mean, Scott Walker's such an interesting person as well. I don't know
anything about him.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, he continued making albums right up until, I think he's dead now, but I think about 10 years ago probably was his last album. And he made this, he just got more and more experimental, and he just made this crazy, like, noisy, weirdo shit music.
Nice.
And, he was amazing. He just like continued going, but he just got stranger and stranger and stranger as he got older. Another kind of, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this one, but a bit of a middle of the road one. Nancy Sinatra with These Boots Are Made for Walking.
I like this song.
Yeah, I thought you might. I don't dislike it, but I mean, it's very middle of the road and easy listening.
It's middle of the road and easy listening or whatever, but I think fucking good words to be singing at that time.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
To just be like, I've got on my sexy shoes, and also I'm going to walk all over you. Like, it's pretty awesome. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'm not against the message. I just think it's a bit of a boring song.
Overdone, pretty shit, and there's better Nancy Sinatra songs. But
go on.
Didn't you do? No.
You seem so sure of it. I thought there was.
No, that one about Bang Bang.
Oh.
Or what's it called?
Yeah.
My Baby Shot Me.
Maybe Shut Me Down. Is
Yeah.
that Nancy Sinatra?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's good.
Oh, I think it is. Yeah, no, it is.
shamcityroasted@gmail.com. Number 4, one of the greatest songs ever made. I referenced this earlier.
The best
and
one in the top 20.
I cannot believe that the other song that I referenced earlier is not in the top 20. So anyway, this is the Four Tops with Reach Out, I'll Be There. And just to say, 'cause this was a big time for Motown. And definitely, like, the book talks a lot about how much the Motown artists, like, push the civil rights agenda, not by being outrightly political whatsoever, but just by being so fucking talented and amazing and making such incredible music and like breaking the charts. The Four Tops and the Supremes are like my mum's favourite band, so I've just been listening to them since I was born, more or less. Reach Out, I'll Be There is my favourite Four Top song by far, but I mean they've done some fucking good ones. Stand in the Shadows of Love is also absolutely incredible. But yeah, Reach Out, I'll Be There is just like, it's the song that reminds me of my childhood. And You Keep Me Hanging On by the Supremes is another song which just totally, it just immediately makes me think of long car journeys as a sort of 7-year-old or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, 2 of my absolute favourite songs of all time. I saw the Four Tops live in probably like the early 2000s, but it was just like one of them. He was one of the backing singers.
One of them.
And then like the other 3 were really young. And they were brilliant, but it wasn't the Four Tops at all. It was just like one old boy that didn't really do anything. And then 3 young guys that could sing really well.
Oh, the rest is rubbish.
Yeah, number 3, the Beatles, Yellow Submarine, Eleanor Rigby. Like I say, so Eleanor Rigby, the Four Tops, weirdly, the Four Tops version of Eleanor Rigby is fucking brilliant. Yellow Submarine is just distasteful.
Yellow Submarine makes, like, the fact that they would write that and release it makes me think they think that the public are fucking, like, stupid. But what's worse is that the public really liked it. Like, I think it sounds like an awful children's song, and I don't understand why it's good.
I don't know. I'm going to put
maybe
5 and 5
being
together
stupid
here a little bit. So let's just quickly talk about the Beatles. So 1966 was the year that the Beatles kind of changed, as it were. So there's a bunch of things that happened. John Lennon said that the Beatles had got bigger than Jesus, and so as a result in America they had all their records were being burnt and all of this sort of nonsense.
They played their last show in
They played their
America.
last ever gig, yeah, and they basically said that they didn't really want to be what they'd been before. So prior to this they'd been, you know, smiley in suits singing like pop songs, yeah, and they wanted to kind of experiment and do more stuff. They all started using LSD around about this time. They started kind of just really, it seems like all of their interviews with the media and stuff, they'd just sort of given up. They weren't trying. They were rude to journalists. They were just sort of... So in some ways, I wonder, my point is, whether Yellow Submarine was actually that they had distaste for the general public. Because I suppose, in fairness to them, they were still really young. They'd spent those years where they were just hounded and hounded and hounded, constantly on the road, and like, I mean, not just them, all of those bands. And so so I kind of wonder a little bit whether it was a bit of a piss take. It's, I think, the year where they released the least amount of stuff. So up to the run up to 1966, every year since they'd kind of been since they'd come out, they'd released loads and loads of stuff, and it was kind of generally expected they'd release a single every 3 or 4 months. And I think this year they only released 2 singles, I think. And then they spent the last part of the year in the recording studio making what would eventually become Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Which, I have to say, is the only Beatles album that I would probably listen to. And I think that there was quite a lot of bands that sort of went through the same thing as the Beatles, which is, again, why 1966 seems to be considered this year of change. The Rolling Stones were kind of doing the same thing, although they weren't nearly as clean cut and things like that as the Beatles. They also had kind of got burnt out from being on the road all the time and kind of got a bit sick of it, and they were making songs that were kind of increasingly going the way that they were going, which was a lot less sort of easy listening. And I guess whilst this was going on as well, there was the advent of things like the Monkees, where like big major studios were putting bands together to try and replicate what the Beatles had done. And I suppose that almost probably became quite uncool, and like it wasn't what people were doing anymore. 3 years earlier, wearing suits and smiling and, you know, writing nice little pop songs was really cool and like a bit revolutionary. But by the time 1966 comes along, there was a lot of stuff going on in the world, I think. And then the last 2 songs are just absolute tosh.
Nah.
So number 2 is Frank Sinatra with Strangers in the Night, and number 1 is Jim Reeves with Distant Drums.
Boo,
Distant
boo.
Drums was the one I was trying to think of earlier. That was, so it's just rubbish. It's just like an easy listening song, but it was massive. So that's the charts.
I mean, there's other songs on this
let's-
list. I had a very quick skim through of some songs that definitely should have been in that top 20.
Well, there's a bunch of fucking amazing songs that came out that definitely aren't on that. So I'll just run through a few while you're looking. So, I mean, Under My Thumb and Paint It Black both came out.
Painted Black are in there. Under My Thumb is my favourite
two of
Rolling
the best
Stones
Rolling
song.
Stones songs. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of the Rolling Stones, but again, like I said earlier, really, I mean, if there was anyone I was going to kind of cling to and think, oh, someone might have done something good in 1966, it was them, but they didn't really do that much. But they did do those two songs.
I mean,
are
Paint
fucking
It Black
great.
is amazing.
Yeah. No,
And yeah,
I
Under
think
My
it's
Thumb.
their best. Probably their best 2 songs, maybe. I mean, but Satisfaction, which is my other favourite, was only, I think it was the very end of 1965. So, I mean, it was very much in the same period.
I mean, my favourite Rolling Stones is their comeback time. so I don't get to count. But yeah, Under My Thumb. Oh.
Substitute by The Who came out that year.
Yeah.
I think that's a good Who song. I'm not that crazy about The Who, really.
I really don't like The Who.
No, I don't think it is.
There's probably some songs that are reasonable, but Otis Redding, My Girl,
Yeah.
just like...
Well, there's loads you could go.
So,
if you went
if you
through-
go down that hole, there's tons.
If you went through, because I think it was Stax and Motown were the main soul labels.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at all of the songs that came out on just those 2 labels alone, it's like every good soul and Motown record. James Brown released I Feel Good. I mean, could it be any better than that? James Brown was quite an interesting character, really. I mean, he is a very interesting character, but I think around about this time, like I said earlier, he was kind of starting to come out of himself a little bit. And he definitely started moving from... James Brown was never clean-cut James Brown. He was never really the Beatles. But I think he was definitely starting to really let loose. And the music that he was making around about this time, but I mean, I Feel Good, you know.
I mean,
it's untouchable,
amazing.
isn't it? Like...
Oh, so the Spencer Davis group, we mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
I've got written on here, Give Me Some Lovin'. Is that the song that I think it is? Because I fucking love that song.
Yeah.
I think I prefer it because people have covered it since.
Yeah.
But that's a bloody good song. Love that.
There's a couple of slightly lesser known things that were going on in 1966 that we should probably mention. I mean, there's definitely... I think, again, sometimes this narrative is kind of skewered a little bit, but there's definitely a lot of... sort of talk that there was bands around this time that were the like forerunners of punk, or at least the forerunners of the forerunners of punk.
Yeah.
And I think there's some truth to it. I mean, the 13th Floor Elevators, they released You're Gonna Miss Me, which is an incredible song.
Okay.
And that's Rocky Erickson, who made a load of solo songs as well. And generally speaking, they're kind of like the godfathers of psychedelia, but also are definitely his voice. He could be a punk singer, I would say.
okay.
And it's such a great song. I'll definitely put that on there. Crispin St. Peters released his song "The Pied Piper." That might not mean very much to many people, but Crispin St. Peters was my dad's mate, and Pete. Oh, what Pete? Yeah.
Oh, what? Yeah.
But a strange story about Crispin St. Peters that I'll just tell you very quickly is that he was my dad's mate who. My dad always used to go on about, and I always used to think he was just some bloke that who must have played songs down his local pub or something. And he'd always say, "Oh yeah, we go and see, Pete down the Woolwich or whatever." And so I never really thought that much of him, but I knew that he'd had like what my dad said was a hit single, and I thought,
piss off.
he might have put out 7-inch, and it kind of got into. But no, he was number 1 in Canada. He was number 5 in America, I think, and it wasn't quite as high in the UK, but it was like number 13 or something. And the song "The Pied Piper," and he had 3 hits, I think, two hits in 1966. But weird little thing during about 10 years ago. I took a break from being a mental health nurse for a little while, and I went on the funerals, and I became one of the people that did the funeral, carried coffins. And he died, and he was from Swanley, and Swanley was in our little catchment area, so I carried his.
You helped him on his last goodbye.
That's exactly what I did.
That's definitely how you spoke.
But so I was So there you go. That's a weird little tale.
There's another song that came out that year that I've heard referenced in a couple of punk documentaries. I think Henry Rollins mentions it in something we watched, and it's Psychotic Reaction by the Count Five, because a lot of people count that as like an early prelude to punk as well. I'm not sure exactly why, because it's not that good, but
yeah, it's weird. Some of the things that
it does get mentioned.
Yeah, some of the things that kind of are listed in that way, you can't really hear them now. I suppose they were different for the time, maybe.
But then also there's a band that I have a horrible feeling is actually 1965, but I am going to mention it purely because it kept coming up as 1966 when I first looked at it, and I'm really glad to have found it. And it's a band called Los Secos, and the song is called Demolition, and the lyrics literally translate as "Let's destroy the train station, let's destroy the train station, demolish, demolish, demolish."
That sounds amazing.
Which the lyrics imply that they say that there's, despite of the period Peru was going through at the time, the band say the lyrics lack any political content. It's just simply to imply that train stations must be destroyed. That's what the Wikipedia page says. Fuck knows if that's true.
Great. That's good.
But annoyingly, on further looking, it's actually come out in 65. But the way that this man sings, like, it sounds. I can understand that this could be a pre-punk thing. It's very garage rock, and it's so cool.
I suppose a lot of it's in the voice. It's similar to that 13th floor elevators. It's like the music kind of just sounds like 60s music, but I suppose if you tweak something about it, you know. Similar to that, very similar to that, a really influential group for like later on garage bands was the Monks. And 1966 was very much the year of the Monks. There's some absolutely fucking incredible live footage of the Monks playing in 1966, which I'll put on the YouTube playlist, which if you don't watch anything else, definitely watch this. These guys are fucking nuts. They were basically, they're American. They're a bunch of American ex-GIs who were stationed in Berlin. And when they kind of came to the end of their service, they decided they were going to start a band, and they thought they might as well stay in Germany. So they did. They called themselves the Monks, and they literally shaved monk haircuts into themselves. And they played extremely 60s sounding music, don't get me wrong, but oh mate, I mean, if it's not almost punk, I don't know what is.
I definitely thought it was.
I think if you remove the organ and the tambourine, it's just they're a fucking punk band in 1966, and it's crazy. The live footage of them, people are going nuts. It's so
it is
cool.
awesome.
So yeah, definitely watch that.
My one other songs to mention, which I hinted at her in the quiz, if everyone remembers my wonderful quiz, Jefferson Airplane. The songs that they made this year are just awesome. White Rabbit.
Yeah,
and
White Rabbit's
did Somebody
incredible.
to Love come out this year as well, or is that the next year?
Oh, no, it did. You're right. They have got two songs. Yeah, sorry, I
songs
disagreed with you earlier, but you're right.
Yeah,
they're both as good as
No,
each
White
other.
Rabbit's like really cool just for like wailing, but Somebody to Love is like actually banging.
Yeah. And that woman, Grace Slick, has got an incredible voice. She did go on to be in Starship.
Don't even.
But no, I'm not bad-mouthing them really,
Starship
but it's
fucking
just
cool,
like...
and I cannot wait for those years.
Yeah, but there couldn't be anything more different from like this incredible original sounding like band, the Jefferson Airplane, and then fucking Starship.
But Starship is a descendant of...
No, it is, absolutely.
Like,
but I'm just saying, there couldn't be anything different on the musical spectrum.
And then I remember we bought... the joy of buying records is that you just buy them because of their weird front covers. And I remember buying this weird record for you, and I was like, oh, there's a weird woman on the front. She's riding on a wrecking ball, and she looks mental. She always looks like she's wearing like Flintstones clothing. I was like, God, you're gonna love this. We've got it. We put it on, and I was like, holy fuck, I know this woman. It's fucking... And it was Grace Slick. It was her solo album from after Starship.
It sounds a bit like Starship.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's not that crazy, actually. It could... everything about it suggests it's going to be a real, like, surprise.
Yeah.
And it's not that crazy.
Is what you think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's that.
Right, I bet we haven't covered anywhere near the amount of music that came in 1966, but I think we're going to call it a day there. We're going to move on to our last section, which is going to be films. So if Timebot 500, if you haven't fallen asleep, if you could just sort us out with a little intro.
Well, to the point. So
he doesn't fuck about this time.
He does not fuck about.
He's not got many circuits left.
No. So, film quiz. Walt Disney dies this year.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, I love Disney, but he's a horrible man. So he dies this year during the production of which film? And it was the last thing he was involved with.
Oh God, I was going to read this fact earlier and I stopped myself because it was film. It's Pinocchio.
No.
Ah, damn it! Is it Snow White? No, that's too early.
That's the first one.
Is it Jungle Book?
Yay!
Yes. I
Well
knew I
done.
read it early.
Do you know any songs from the Jungle Book?
Whoa, oh, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh, oh. Oh no, that's Rick Petit. No, I don't.
No. That's
Why
fine.
did I think Rick Petit was?
I fucking love Rick
Oh,
Petit.
it's fucking
But isn't
brilliant.
that like 8?
I'd like to say I've got so many facts in my head.
Is it Jackie?
Jackie Gleason? No, not
No,
Jackie Gleason. Fucking hell.
Let's
Not going well.
Let's not. Okay,
Let's move on to the films.
Because we're into facts. Now I wish I'd learnt this fact earlier because we'd have watched this film.
All right, go on.
Many people have described this as the worst film ever made, and it was made this year. What is it called? And let me just tell you its IMDb rating. It's 1.9 out of 10. It's got a 0 on Rotten Tomatoes.
So I did look up.
And it's been named, and people have famously said that this film is just the worst for very many reasons.
So I did look up really bad films, and I mean, I thought there was, but it wouldn't be. It's not 1 million BC, is it? No, that definitely wouldn't be. That's like a classic, but it is trashy. I really don't know. Go on. I'm interested.
Manos, The Hands of Fate.
Ah, I can see. I know what the monster looks like from Manos, The Hands of Fate. So there's what's that thing? Science mystery.
Yeah, so that's why it got its like cult following.
I
after
started
being on
watching
there.
this once, and it is unwatchable. It
'Cause they
starts
said-
off with a really long car journey.
Well,
where no
so
one
they
says
said
anything.
that car journey was meant to be the credits film.
Okay.
But basically, the people who decided they were going to make it didn't want to do it anymore. No one was getting paid. No, the people who were editing it weren't getting paid either. So basically, loads of editing never got done. There's loads of things out of shot.
Yeah.
There's loads of bits where insects just go over the screen and they just let it happen. There's loads of things out of focus. There's people going, "Oh my god, it's so dark in here," when it's like blinding sunlight. And it's just famously horrific.
Yeah.
And if I'd have realised that earlier, I would have watched it.
No, well, I don't think, because like I say, I did try and watch it with the mystery. I don't really like that Mystery Science Theatre
Yeah.
very much, but I tried to watch it with them, and even with them, I turned it off after about half an hour because it just felt like I was wasting my life.
Yeah, I think you would have been wasting your life.
And I can watch some shit.
Yeah, I know. Right. Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
She was born with what genetic mutation,
Ooh.
which led to the name of her perfume brand?
Oh, Jesus.
I didn't know this.
I mean, absolutely no idea. I'm going to say that she had web feet.
What was her perfume called if she had web feet?
Web by Elizabeth Taylor.
Moist creases.
Moist.
No, she had this thing, which, I mean, oh, poor her. Dysdicia, which means she had double sets of eyelashes. Oh, boo-hoo, too many eyelashes, look so beautiful.
Oh, that's weird. What,
Yeah.
is there like one on top of the other?
Yeah, so she had a double set of eyelashes, but she also had purple irises. So she had purple eyes,
Oh, that's weird.
and she named her perfume Violet Eyes.
Violet eyes.
Violet
by
eyes.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes, not moist creases. Okay, one last one. Clint Eastwood, he was also active this year. He became mayor of Carmel by Sea in 1986 and 1988. So a little bit later. But
1986?
yeah.
Right.
But he's, he does a very famous film this year.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So sorry.
God, you're really clutching at straws.
Well,
here.
I made this quiz up myself.
Right,
Can you
go on.
tell? So Clint Eastwood,
Yeah.
he's in a famous film this year, but in 1986, so 20 years later,
Yeah.
he becomes the mayor of Carmel by Sea.
Mm-hmm.
What law did he overturn?
He really likes guns, Clint Eastwood, doesn't he? So is it something to do with guns? Does he like? No, that's
What's
the
the
other
opposite
one.
of a gun?
Blankets.
He overturned the ice cream cone law, so people could eat ice cream on the streets again.
Were
and
you not
everyone was
allowed to
very
eat ice
happy.
cream on the streets?
So basically, you
in
weren't allowed
1986.
in 1986 in Carmel by Sea. Basically, I think it was a fuddy-duddy bit of California. Is it California? Where
I mean, it
they
sounds
didn't
like it would
they
be
didn't
on the-
like tourists. It sounds
Right.
so there was a lot of tourists couldn't park anywhere, and people weren't allowed to eat fast food on the streets. So what he did is in his 2 years he made tourist parking available and overturned this law, and then all the tourists came and everyone hated him.
What's he
And did it for 2
doing with
years.
himself in 1986 that he became the mayor of a town? Didn't he
Well,
become a director,
I
like-
looked him up, and apparently he's very political.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like I said, I always get him mixed up with the other really terrible one who really, really likes guns. Who's that guy from Planet of the Apes? For fuck's sake. Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston, that's it.
And so I think I always give Clint Eastwood Charlton Heston's politics in my mind.
Oh,
which is a bit unfair because I don't think he's not like that at all.
No, I mean he made campfires illegal on the beach, Wankstein, but he did say you could eat ice cream in the street. Yeah. So good on him. And that's the end of all of my quiz sections.
Well, that was better than listening to songs by excellent DIY punk bands, wasn't it?
There you go. Be careful what you never wished for.
So we're now going to go through the top 10 movies of 1966.
This will be quite quick because we haven't watched them all.
We're using metv.com just because it was the nicest looking version of the top 10 films that we could possibly find. This is based on the American box office. So at number 10, we've got Blow Up. This is a film that we did watch. It's a UK film. It's filmed in London. I think if I'd watched this film completely without context, I would have enjoyed it. But I think in the context of the times, having read a little bit about the year that it came from and read about all of the culture that was going on, I definitely think it kind of captures something. It's about a photographer who's kind of really hip and he's taking loads of photos of like really, all the sort of beautiful people of London. And he's in a park and he does sort of street photography. And while he's he's taking loads of pictures, and a woman runs up to him and says, "Oh, you can't take that picture. You can't take that picture." And later on, when he develops the films, he notices that there looks like there's a dead body in the bush, and it appears like these people have maybe murdered this person. It's never really explained. He eventually goes back to the park and has a look, and he can't find the body. And then there's kind of a question about whether it ever really happened or not.
Well, no, he finds the body.
Oh, he finds the body, and then he goes away and comes back.
Tells people about it, comes back, and then it's not there.
But it's a real question of what's real and whether it's within his reality. There's loads of stuff about just being kind of burnt out on culture, I think. It's a really interesting film. And my initial reaction to it when it finished was, I didn't necessarily love it while I was watching it. Although I thought it was good, but it's all sort of filmed around Woolwich and it's all sort of like outer southeast London, and so it has a very sort of grey look. It's not a particularly attractive film in any way. The guy's really dislikable, but he's supposed to be, and kind of all the characters are really dislikable, but they're supposed to be. But it really stuck with me. It's a film that I've thought a lot about since I think, and I think I would say if you've not seen it, definitely watch Blow Up. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think when we watched it, I was like, I'm not sure I really like this. And then at the end, when we were talking about it a bit more and about that kind of like thinking about because it's interesting when you're watching it, you don't really notice, but pretty much all of the action happens in one day, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And the whole point of watching this man go from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other, you really get a sense of that. There's scenes that start that don't seem to end in any kind of sensible way, and then he's somewhere else, and then you don't really know why he's there or why he's doing what he's doing, and then he walks away. Like he's in the middle of a photo shoot and he tells everyone to close his eyes, and then he leaves. Yeah. And he comes back, they're still shut, yeah, cool, and then he goes back out and does something else.
I think the idea is as well that he's super busy because he's so important.
But that's it.
But he's not in
Exactly. But it's better than I gave it credit for at the time, and like you say, I haven't thought about it a huge amount, but I definitely think, having reflected on it, I did like it a bit more. And on here it says it's a film school staple, which I can very much see why it would be.
Yeah. In at number 9 is a film called Grand Prix, which made 20 million at the box office. Before he was chasing around a Pontiac Firebird on the Rockford Files, James Garner starred in this Formula One film. Yeah, not interested in Formula One.
No.
Nothing to say about Grand Prix. The Russians Are Coming is a comedy about a Russian sub that parks on the coast of New England. I mean, I think this is probably a film that... it's trash. I wouldn't be interested in watching it remotely, but I definitely think it says something about the general feeling in America at that time, which obviously was still... the Cold War was kind of bubbling. There was a lot of tension between Russia and a lot of different countries, obviously with Vietnam going on. And this is kind of like a real crappy Hollywood movie to just pique everybody's interest in how scared of the Russians you should be. Lieutenant Robinson Crusoe, USN. Dick Van... God, this sounds so shit. This is a Disney-fied retelling of Robinson Crusoe starring Dick Van fucking Dyke. in 1966. I can't imagine how bad this is. It made $22.5 million at the box office. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is probably the most famous film, like looking back on this year.
Yeah.
Like
Which
you say,
we
it's
chose
got
not
Clint
to
Eastwood in it.
watch.
No. I can't stand
Yeah.
Western films. What do you think of Western films?
I don't know that I've ever watched a proper Western. I think I've only watched modern retellings or modern day Western films, like when they remade True Grit, and that might be the only one. Oh, what was that one we watched where there was some really nasty murder at the end? It's more exploitation.
Bone Tomahawk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was, and I don't know if that really counts as a Western.
No, it does.
No,
It
really
It's
doesn't.
definitely a horror movie. But yeah, I mean, I suppose it's got elements of that.
Yeah.
I think The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, a lot of these were made by Italian filmmakers, and then the spaghetti western kind of started up. I've stumbled across a few of these films in the past, and they're quite nice to look at. They're really well photographed and stuff. I suppose the scenery is beautiful, but I don't know. I just don't understand what's interesting about them. Really.
Very good soundtrack though.
Yeah.
Ennio Morricone. Is that how you say it? Ennio Morricone.
Yeah, I think
Morricone?
so. In at number 5 is A Man for All Seasons.
Oh Christ! No one needs to know anything about that.
A classic about church and state in 16th century England. We can skip that. The Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen is in at number 4. We got $30 million.
War films.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
America will need to push how good war is in this year.
I think there's an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
And then in at number 3 is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which we watched. It's a dark comedy about one night in the lives of 4 people, but it's really about 2 of them.
About
2 couples, one of whom are like an older pair of intellectuals who have been together for far too long, and one of whom is a really young couple who, in a lot of ways also probably have been together for too long in a funny sort of way. It is an absolute fucking masterpiece.
It's so good.
It's based on a play by Edward Albee. I actually read the play, I think at school. I think I did it for my A-level or something. Although I can't remember anything about it, but then, I didn't learn anything at school. But as a film and as a performance, I mean, Elizabeth Taylor is absolutely incredible in it. And the comedy is so dark, but it's subtle. It's not like a laugh out loud film, although you do chuckle at quite a lot of what they say.
It's dark, it's kind of subtle, but it's relentless.
Relentless,
every other, especially when Richard Burton and Liz Taylor's characters are talking to each other. It's every sentence.
Yeah.
They're so you could just It's so clever because it's so passive aggressive and it's so real. Like, you could just imagine this really being a couple of people having these awful quips at each other that are absolutely hilarious. And they're both delivered so well.
Yeah, it's somewhere between their performances, which are just they were a couple, and they did genuinely have quite a difficult relationship, from what I can make out. So I'm sure that probably added to it to some extent. But also the script, the writing is unbelievably good, and then the way that they deliver those lines is unbelievably good. And the other 2 that are in it, it's unfortunate in a way because their performances are absolutely brilliant, but in comparison to the other 2, they sort of almost look like they can't act.
But then equally, part of the story is that it's this couple that are overwhelming and taking over their evening. So it's kind of fitting that their performance gets a little bit lost because their existence gets a little bit lost between these 2 just having a quarrel.
Yeah, that's
for
true.
the entire night.
Yeah.
But it's so good. I didn't know. I've never read the play. I don't know anything about the play, so I didn't know what to expect at all. And it was, having watched, because prior to this we watched some other films that were UK filmed. Having watched those 2 UK horror films that we watched, which we'll talk about in a minute, to then watching this was just insanely different. Yeah. And
this could have been made. I mean, apart from maybe the fact that it's you can tell production wise it's grainy and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't matter if this was made today.
It's
or
proper
if it was
timeless.
made it's perfect. If you've not seen it, and I imagine most people probably have, or at least know of it,
that's the one.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? It's the finest thing that came out of 1966, apart from...
Don't be put off that it's from the 60s.
In at number 2 is Hawaii. It's just a saga with Max von Sydow. and it's the story of American missionaries on the Pacific Islands. And I think it's quite interesting that that's obviously got a religious film, because in at number 1 is The Bible in the Beginning, which is the number 1 film in America. So, I mean, it's incredible that number 1 and number 2 are still obviously like super religious films.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, The Bible in the Beginning, which only tells the Old Testament, I don't think they made a second one, which seems strange to me, considering this was such a it obviously like did really well at the box office. But yeah,
I think those who want to know know.
Yeah. But yeah, I just find it's really interesting. Again, like, you know, all the stuff that obviously we've skewered 1966 a bit by just looking for all of the kind of
Things we like.
Yeah, well, yeah, the more counterculture type stuff. But it's incredible to me that the top 2 movies, and if we go back a step, the top 2 songs are both like super middle of the road, super like base level, religious, or you know.
It hints at what the wider world still likes. It's kind of how I feel about nowadays, when you're like, so, God, everyone I know is going to vote this way, and everyone I know is really liberal, and this is what's going to happen. And then your country overwhelmingly votes for something else.
The Bible is
like,
at the top of the film charts.
And you're just like, oh, holy shit, turns out I really am the minority still. There was a time when the number 1 book was always being sold. Number 1 bestseller in the world is the Bible.
I don't know if that's a myth,
so it doesn't get mentioned anymore.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing.
So the number 1 that you see is actually number 2 always to the Bible. I may have made that up, and whether that's true anymore, I don't know. That
can't possibly be true.
It can't be true anymore.
Can it? I mean, it could be true, but it can't possibly be true.
I mean, if that's true... Anyway, no one tell us if that's true. I'd like to pretend that.
shamcityroasters@gmail.com. So we watched a few other films from 1966, which we sort of handpicked that we just want to cover a little bit. Let's start with those 2 horror movies. I think we can bundle them in together, because they were almost the same film. They certainly had almost the exact same sets.
And some of the same cast.
Yeah. But so we watched 2 Hammer horror movies, The Reptile and The Plague of the Zombies. Yeah. Generally speaking, The Reptile is considered a real Hammer horror classic.
Yeah, like I looked at the BFI top 10, and that was the only one that jumped out at me. I was like, ooh.
Yeah. I mean, Hammer horror was like an old... actually, they are still going in some form. They kind of restarted themselves about 10 years ago, and they've made a few films, I think, since then. But they were like the classic UK horror movie house. They made all the Peter Cushing films, all the Christopher Lee films, Dracula and Frankenstein, but the UK versions of those films. When I was a kid, I used to love the idea of Hammer horror. Like, I used to read a lot of horror magazines and stuff like that. And I'd always see these incredible. Their posters are always, they make the film look so cool. And then if you see like shots from the films, they look so amazing, and they're really beautiful, and all the sets are cool, and it's all kind of like classic horror stuff. It's like mad scientists in labs, and wolf men, and full moons, and all this sort of stuff. But actually, I used to find as a kid that if I ever actually sat down and tried to watch one, I'd always find them kind of boring. And they're extremely English. They're all set in this weird... I mean, maybe not all, because they got a bit sexy. So in the 70s, so this is probably the last batch of their films that they're kind of like pushing the envelope a little bit. There's a little bit of blood, and there's a little bit of kind of like... In both of these, there's different plots, which are like... One of them's sort of an African myth, and one of them's kind of an Indian myth.
Yeah.
So there is, they are kind of pushing the envelopes a little bit, but as time goes on, they become real sort of like boobs and lesbians, and it's kind of real 70s type stuff. And I think that was when they, as a studio, were starting to wane, and they were kind of churning stuff out for the grindhouse a little bit. But these 2 films, so they were filmed very close to each other in time, and I'm pretty sure that
I think they're both in Cornwall.
Yeah, some of them are they definitely use the same places in some of these.
I think the pub's the same in both of them.
The pub's definitely the same. Yeah. And so, yeah, like you say, some of the actors are the same. I think they're both. I enjoyed both of them.
Yeah,
I found them really watchable, but I don't necessarily have any particular recommendation. I wouldn't say the plots are great, or the acting's great, or anything really. They look quite nice.
I feel like it was a bit Scooby-Doo-ish in as much as you know how it's gonna go.
Yeah,
like definitely. No surprises whatsoever. Reasonably well made, quite well shot, and very watchable. But you kind of just know how it's gonna go. There's no like exciting, interesting bit.
Yeah.
I thought The Reptile was more interesting.
Yeah.
But by a tiny margin.
I was going to say, I didn't see a great... Considering The Reptile's remembered as this amazing film and The Plague of Zombies isn't really,
Yeah.
I didn't see any difference between the two.
No,
I'm not really
didn't.
sure why one's considered better than the other.
No.
One of the things I was going to say is that, and I think this is true of a lot of Hammer horror films, they're all set in this really weird time period.
Oh,
that I couldn't quite put my finger on, because it's definitely not 1966, because everyone's sort of dressed up. It's not like... They're not really Victorian, are they? But they sort of have elements of
They're
Victorian.
kind of... Whenever Sherlock Holmes is set, that's kind of the world that they're set in.
Yeah, and that kind of is Victorian.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's some more modern things than that as well. Like,
I feel like it's... I don't really understand why, but I feel like it's the Sherlock Holmes kind of
you're probably
time
right.
period that they've set it in.
But everyone's got plums in their mouth.
Yeah.
Everyone's all the lead characters have. There's a lot of sort of old men that can suddenly do not karate, but like whatever oldie English version of karate there is. You know, they can suddenly beat up lots of people. So the Plague of the Zombies had a kind of African myth basis. So they were kind of doing voodoo, and that was making people into zombies. And the Reptile had a kind of like Indian
I don't
basis.
remember.
And the Reptile was from some sort of like Indian hocus pocus.
Yeah, that's it. It was all a bit...
Which is quite interesting, I suppose, because obviously this was sort of the end of the empire. And I definitely think you can see this in a lot of Hammer horror stuff, is that, they picked... India was it was like another part of Britain in people's minds, and some of Africa was another part of Britain in people's minds. So it's a very odd way that people must have viewed the world when these films came out. And I think there were a lot of Hammer horror films use like Egypt, like Egyptology, as a basis for their things. It's kind of the things that I guess people were into, like the weird shit that people were into in 1966, the sort of man, myth and magic type stuff.
And then the other film that we watched at this time was The Wild Angels, which is about like a Hells Angels kind of group. It's meant to be the Hells Angels.
Well, it actually is the
Hells Angels. That's true. Yeah. Some of the Hells Angels they actually are in the film.
Yeah, none of the actors or anything.
No,
they're like in the background.
But some of the backing kind of extras. So this has got Peter Fonda, is that right? And Nancy Sinatra is in this one as well. Yeah. And
nothing really happens in this film, does it?
Nothing really happens other than a speech that Pram was screaming up quoting, which you've quoted at the beginning.
That's not the only thing that happens. I mean, the basic plot is that one of them comes unstuck with the law, and then they kind of save him, and then he ends up dying, and that's kind of it.
And then they have his funeral.
It's kind of one of these...
Which is awful.
Yeah, the funeral's awful. I mean, it's seen as kind of like a bit of a classic in film history. And I suppose two things. One, how different is a Hammer horror film from the UK?
Oh my gosh!
And The Wild Angels.
So in all the English films, it's just like, I mean, there's still like the same disdain for women in both of them, but the way that the men and women speak to each other in the English film is like laughable. It's just like, oh, do you make the dinner? No, I won't make the dinner. Oh, okay, well, I guess I'll be making dinner today. Yeah. And then you've got The Wild Angels, which is just actual raucous, raucous to the point where I was quite there's things that are uncomfortable in it by a lot, and it's meant to be uncomfortable, and it's meant to show you just how outrageous and lawless that this gang was, but it's just kind of its only purpose is that the storyline completely wanes. Yeah,
well, I mean, I think that is exactly, and so this is one of many biker films. It's generally considered to be one of the best, apart from Easy Rider, which came after it. But Easy Rider's quite a lot different. It's less exploitation. It's much more artfully made. But I think this was like we were saying earlier. It was at a time when bikers were the most feared things in the country, and no one really knew anything about them. So by default, if an exploitation filmmaker, and by the way, this was written and directed by Roger Corman, who is the ultimate exploitation person, literally for 40 years or something, he made the vast majority of exploitation movies that you would probably have ever even heard of. If someone's making an exploitation film about the most scared gang in the country, of course they're going to play up all of the tabloid extremes that were coming out about them. And don't get me wrong, some of them I'm sure were probably quite true.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's like a skewered version in as much as there was truth to it. And like I say, there's actual Hells Angels in it, and they were involved, and I think there might even be story editor.
Yeah,
might have been
probably.
Sonny Barger or something. it's still like turned up to 11.
Definitely.
And I mean, the last scene. I don't know how easy it is to even explain how fucking mental the last scene is. Really, just if you add up when you're watching it, because it comes at the end of a film where loads of crazy shit's happened. Although it's shocking and everything, until you sit back and you think, right, all these things happened at someone's funeral in this film.
Yeah.
It's fucking mental. I mean, I don't know which bits to mention.
No, I don't know. I definitely
honest.
think it's worth watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, just be prepared for it just not to be very nice come the funeral. But what I would say is it's quite... One interesting point maybe is that kind of notion of people just accepting some horrendous stuff for the sake of being in... Like, I don't understand the biker gang thing. And I know someone who is in a club now, not called gangs, they're called clubs. And some of the stuff, and like he's an older guy, and some of the stuff that he talks about that is just still accepted and still just the norm, it's just really interesting to hear that could even still... certain really strange things are so acceptable and so accepted by people within those groups.
Yeah.
And I think this film just, as much as it is exploitation, I think there is a kind of takeaway of this kind of what does end up still being acceptable within your group of people, especially within like this kind of like biker gang style thing. It was just really strange. I remember watching it and thinking, how are all these people involved with all of this awfulness within their own group and still accepted, and it's just like, this is just how it is, this is just what it is, and yet they still seem to love each other, yet they treat each other so awfully.
It's something about a culture, isn't it, really? It's just like us, like hanging around with punks. There's a certain expectations that are put on you. And within the punk scene, most of those expectations are really positive. And they're really kind of, they're nice things. But whereas I think, and I'm not even saying that in sort of biker culture it's anything terrible. It's none of my business what they do or what their expectations are on each other, really. But I suppose it's different. It's like if you were in the Proud Boys, then you're expected to be an arsehole. That's what the expectation of that group is. So as a result, that's good. You're good if you're an arsehole. Do you know what I mean? And so I suppose it's that thing about group dynamics, I suppose.
Yeah, I just guess it's weird to have seen... I was just like... The assumption is that you'll be horrible to other people.
Yeah.
And in something where it's so collective and so strength in numbers and so... Not even strength in numbers, because it's actually quite niche, but like it's so like you're strong in the group. To then to do some of the worst things to each other within the group and then still be this strong family at the end of it, and it's just acceptable and it's not talked about. It was just really, it was quite like, I felt really shocked and kind of weird about it long after, but actually I do think it's probably an important message to have taken from it, that actually there is stuff that people just accept within groups because it's just the norm within a group. Yeah, is good and bad. I mean, I personally think it's awful, but
we might be over-analysing a sort of
I think I am
exploitation film, but I think that also within that, of course, you've got that group dynamic where everyone looks after each other, but you're also looking at a group that's made up of extremely damaged individuals often. In the context of the film, I'm not talking about anybody who's in a biker club now, because I think it's completely different, but you know, at this time it was like they were outlaws, like they were mostly criminals. They were a lot of people, you know, there was a lot of, they were doing quite a lot of dodgy stuff, the people that this film was based on. And I suppose in that context, you're going to get all of these really damaged people. And that speech at the end, which you will have heard a bit of about 15 hours ago when we very first started this. I mean, as brilliant as it is and out of context, it's just wonderful and like hilarious and stuff, but it is incredible. It's just sort of like somebody saying, we don't want to do anything that society wants us to do. We just want to have fun. We just want to like party and enjoy ourselves. And there's a lot to be said for that. Like, I mean, I think that's kind of that's my beliefs now, I think, pretty much.
Yeah.
In a very different way, but still. But yeah, I think The Wild Angels, it's not like I say, it's like the classic biker film. So I think if you're interested in any 60s biker film, it's definitely worth watching. But I mean, Easy Rider's the ultimate kind of classic, but they're very, very different movies. But they are similar in as much as, and I think this is true of the vast majority of these biker movies that were made for like B movie sort of grindhouses and stuff. Most of them don't really have a story as such. It's just like a bunch of people get into a bit of trouble and then get out of a bit of trouble, and then there's normally some sort of, that speech at the end I think is quite, that happens in different ways in a lot of these films, I think.
Yeah, worth a watch.
Yeah. So that's all of the films, and
Probably it.
and that is
for
pretty much everything from our first ever Timecop episode, in which we tried to discuss the year 1966. We probably missed an awful lot of stuff, but I quite enjoyed doing this. How did you get on with spending 2 weeks researching a year that you didn't think you'd have any interest in?
I really liked it, actually. I love finding out stuff about things I don't know about, which sounds really boring, but that's the whole point of doing this. And just starting with something you think you're not going to like is always a good challenge, because then you're always pleasantly surprised when you find something you do like. And I think I was just surprised to find that there was so much that was interesting, culturally, musically, film, all of the sections that we looked at.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
Nicely
it was
summed up.
I know, but it was. I don't think I have anything much more to add to it.
I mean, did it
from what we
change your
did.
perception of, let's not say 1966 specifically, but like 60s culture, or like mid to late 60s culture? What did it change your perception of it? Or
Not
did you...
really change my perception of the culture so much, because I think I wasn't surprised by the music that we found, and I wasn't surprised by, the cultural, what was going on at the time, and historically everything kind of fits. What I probably was more surprised at was film. I've always poo-pooed watching any films from that kind of time. I've just never really saw it as a thing that I wanted to do. But my opinion changed. I enjoyed every film that we watched, and it was good to watch some of the kind of classics from that time, like Blow Up. Not Blow Up, what was it called?
Blow Up,
yeah. Blow Up was really interesting.
Yeah.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf was just like, could have been made any time.
Yeah.
And I just didn't really think that there would be something so watchable from that time, which is really naive and really poo-pooey to have said. But yeah, it was just far more interesting than I thought it was going to be. But yeah, like, no mega surprises, but definitely like doing it, and it's just always good to do that little dive into a year that you didn't know anything about.
Yeah. I think we were quite lucky with the year in a way, because I think it was, like I say, it was probably, if it had been like 1969, it might have been easier, because I feel like there's stuff that I'm kind of like somewhat aware of already that we can, and like I say, if this was 1998 or something, it would be a very different sort of conversation.
But how about you?
Well, I would say this book that I read, The 1966, The Year the Decade Exploded, by John Savage, I would really recommend that. It's a brilliant book, actually, and it I think that definitely changed my perception of the mid to late 60s. I think, again, I always kind of, in my head, I've always had it down as most of the really interesting alternative politics and stuff, I always saw them as starting in 1969, but I figured that most of them actually played out in the 70s. And I find the early 70s in political sense much more interesting. But actually reading this book and reading about how the mid 60s kind of led into that was really interesting. And yeah, I wasn't that surprised by anything in particular. I was surprised how much I enjoyed Blow Up. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf blew me away, even though I knew it was going to be good and I had seen it before and I'd read it. I didn't necessarily remember it that well. And watching that, I almost was expecting it to be a bit drab, to be honest. But
I was so surprised at how good it was.
Yeah, that blew me away. Music-wise, 13th Floor Elevators I listened to quite a lot, which I hadn't before, even though I knew them and I knew Rocky Erickson. But I was really glad that I did that, because I think they're fucking brilliant. I was so glad to listen to the Monks. So there's we should have mentioned this, there's a covers band, an all-girl Monks covers band in Hastings called the Nuns.
Oh yeah.
And they used to come into the cafe sometimes, and I'd never actually seen them live, but I'm definitely going to go and see them live now. But I think they're quite well renowned in the sort of garage rock scene. The old guitarist from Echo Belly is in them.
And Jasper's daughter.
Yeah. I always kind of thought, who are this Monks lot? And I just sort of figured they were just like a garage rock band. I didn't realise they were even this old. I thought they were from the late 70s or something. And but yeah, like I say again, if there's one thing you watch, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and the footage of the Monks playing live is definitely the one. But yeah, so I don't know. I really enjoyed doing it, and I'm really glad I read that book. I'd really recommend that, even though it is 700 fucking pages. And don't try and read it in 10 days or whatever it's been, because actually I'm quite glad now.
Yeah.
Timebot 500, thank you so much for joining us. You've been a bit quiet for a while. I hope everything's all right.
I am bored.
Oh, fuck's sake,
well,
mate.
Timebot, you're
Jesus
a dick.
Christ, sorry. Well, we'll be inviting you back in 10 episodes' time, so I hope you're not so bored that you won't come back. Thanks so much to everyone who's listened. I know this has been a bit of a strange, different sort of episode. It would be lovely to hear some feedback about this episode, because I've no idea whether this is a good idea or not. We just thought, like, every 10 episodes we'd just, like, change it up a little bit and just do something a little bit different. But we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with a normal episode. We've already started putting that together, and we've got some fucking great bands, so do please tune in to that, even if you just listened to this and thought, God, I hate listening to these two for 2 fucking hours.
I know.
I think that's it from our first ever Timecops episode.
Dilly.
And I hope that you have enjoyed it. We will see you in 2 weeks' time.
Timecop signing out.
Goodbye. Timecop. 1966. Timecop. 1966. We're gonna talk some shit. Timecop.